Chapter 761. After all, Nie Jingyi was a young man of 25 years old. He was quite handsome, especially his head. Girls would often blush when they saw his body. However, he was still single. Speaking of which, the border army at that time wasn't that poor. In addition, the imperial court also had to consider the continuation of the army's household. For this reason, they were very concerned about the marriage of the soldiers. When a young lad reached that age, as long as he wanted to, he still had the ability to marry a woman. Nie Jingyi could only blame himself for being too good. He had always wanted to find a good-looking, kind-hearted, and good lady. There were ladies in the Datong prefecture, but young and beautiful ones were rare. Even if there were, they might not be interested in Nie Jingyi's family background. As time passed, the days passed. When he was 25 years old, he was still unmarried. How could he not be moved when he found out that there was going to be a performance by such a young man? However, the fact that he could become a centurion proved that he wasn't an ordinary soldier. He was a scheming person. When he heard Zhang Quan and Su Dei announce that they weren't allowed to leave the inn today, he didn't react strongly. Instead, he remained silent, giving people the impression that he was very supportive of this decision. You guys, be careful. Watch those who are jumping around. I will deal with them when I return tonight. After receiving news from the city lord's mansion that the peace talks would continue today, Su Dei instructed his centurions before leaving the inn. Nie Jingyi was one of them. The centurions naturally nodded in response to the Kiliarka's orders. After the two of them left, most of the centurions returned to their rooms to sleep. Only 2 centurions were left on duty. Coincidentally, Nie Jingyi was one of them. Nie Jingyi's heart felt like it was on fire. He didn't know why, but he wanted to see what the performance was all about. With this thought in mind, he began to rack his brain, wondering if he should find an opportunity to take a short break. However, when his gaze fell on the entrance of the inn, he realized that there was a squad leader leading a group of 10 people guarding the entrance. He immediately dismissed the idea of forcing his way out. It wasn't that Nie Jingyi didn't have the courage to fight 1 against 10. On the contrary, these ordinary Baiming soldiers were nothing in his eyes. However, he had to consider that once he made a move, he would immediately alert the other centurions. If that happened, no matter how powerful he was, he would not be a match for dozens of centurions. If it were someone else, they might have given up on such an idea. Nie Jingyi was different. Ever since he was a child, he had always been a righteous person. Once he decided on something, he would definitely do it. In the end, he came up with an idea. I can't rush out alone, but what if there are many people? If everyone rushed out together, no one would be able to stop them. The most important thing was that once everyone rushed out, even if Su Dei knew about it later, he wouldn't blame himself. After all, the law couldn't punish the masses. With an idea in mind, Nie Jingyi went to the room of the soldiers who were shouting the loudest with the excuse of patrolling. After that, he gave a speech of generosity. The gist of it was that if they didn't grab hold of some things now, they might not have any hope in their entire lives. Since that was the case, they had to do it even if they had to be scolded behind their backs. Everyone originally had this idea. Now that Nie Jingyi brought it up, they were all overjoyed. After that, he went to the centurion under his control and had a heart-to-heart talk with the soldiers below. After an hour, a small riot began. Caught off guard, the guards who were just putting on a show were pushed to the ground. In an instant, about 300 people walked out of the inn. These people were relatively more courageous or had made up their minds to watch the show. In any case, Nie Jingyi had said that the law couldn't punish the masses. When 30% of the people suddenly ran out, the other centurions were frightened. They hurriedly rushed to the city lord's residence to report to Zhang Quan and Su Dei. In the city lord's residence, Yu Mian had already expressed Yang Qindong's intentions. The negotiations would only last for 3 days. If there were no results, then the people from Baiming would have to leave. Zhang Quan and Su Dei had nothing to say about Yu Mian's domineering aura. This time, they had taken the initiative to rush over to negotiate. Strictly speaking, they were seeking benefits. Now that they were not welcomed, how could they be angry? Since ancient times, it had always been the strong who had the right to speak. With only 3 days left, Zhang Quan did not dare to be careless. He seized every moment to negotiate with Yu Mian. He had already expressed his intention to give in. He had forgotten that just yesterday, he had proposed to allow Bai Ming's army to be stationed in the first city. He had the intention of requisitioning this place and making it the front line of Bai Ming. This request was also discussed by Zhang Quan and Sun Hong before they came. It was also the best goal that they hoped to achieve. However, it was a pity that Yu Mian directly rejected it. He only replied with 3 words, impossible. Yu Mian did not show the slightest sign of weakness. On the contrary, he became the dominant party. He said that the mercenaries occupied the first city and had already dealt a heavy blow to the Tatar forces, the Agadorji tribe and the Mabe Mongolian tribe. Based on this, Bai Ming should pay them. It did not matter how much the military pay was. Yang Qindong wanted to discuss the other party. Besides, if Bai Ming gave the first city 1 tael of silver, then the army would have 1 tael of silver less. This was a matter of decreasing one's losses and increasing one's gains. No matter how much they did, it would never be too much. Zhang Quan naturally expressed a clear rejection of Yu Mian's request. In his words, most of the money from Bai Ming's imperial court was used to develop firearms and train the new army. Even the Datong city's military pay could not be truthfully spent. How could there be any money left to give to the first city? All in all, the first negotiation between the 2 sides was like a lion opening its mouth. At the same time, it was also testing the other party's bottom line. Relatively speaking, today's negotiation was much more pragmatic. Especially after knowing that the negotiation time was only 3 days, Zhang Quan put down his arrogance. He did not mention those impossible requests to stimulate the 2 sides. Instead, he put forward some practical requests and conditions for the 2 sides to be allies. The negotiation began to enter the normal track. When the attitude of both sides began to become gentle, suddenly, a soldier outside the door reported that 2 centurions from the Bai Ming army had come. They said that they had important matters to discuss with Zhang Quan and Su Dei. The negotiation had to be terminated because of this. Yang Mansion. The 4-man post at the door became an 8-man post. At the same time, the number of patrolling soldiers on the streets of the first city began to increase. Even the divisions and regiments that were training in the ice and snow outside the city also gathered and returned to the city. All kinds of signs indicated that something big must have happened in the city. Yang Qindong was in the warm study room. Beta Persei, who was standing beside him, was reporting the situation to him. Young master, I heard that 300 people escaped from the Bai Ming army. They suddenly disappeared. As soon as he received the news, Lord Yu increased the speed and strength of the patrols in the city. Our young mansion has also made sufficient preparations. The troops that were training outside the city are also returning to the city. Director Feng of the Security Bureau is dispatching people to secretly search for them. After reporting all the information he knew in one breath, Beta Persei took a breath and then waited for Yang Qindong's instructions. 300 people escaped. What's going on? Yang Qindong's expression became serious at this moment. If this was Bai Ming's plan, these 300 people were likely to cause chaos in the city. Of course, it was only 300 people. In a city with a population of more than 50,000 people and an army of more than 30,000 people, it was not a big deal. According to the Security Bureau in the inn, it was because many Bai Ming soldiers were very interested in the show performed by our publicity team. They wanted to watch the show, but the higher-ups did not allow it, so they escaped privately. Beta Persei scratched his head and said a reason that was not a reason. What? At this moment, even Yang Qindong was confused by these words. Just to watch a performance, 300 people had disappeared. This was indeed beyond his expectations, and it made him feel like it was child's play. Beta Persei also felt ridiculous when he first heard the news. But since it was reported by the Security Bureau and reported to the sixth young master, it should not be wrong. Who would dare to joke about such a big thing? This was a very serious problem. Yes, that's what was reported. Young master, what do you think? Beta Persei carefully asked Yang Qindong how to deal with it. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he fell into deep thought for a while. After a while, Yang Qindong seemed to have made up his mind and said, Beta Persei, go and see where the publicity team is performing today. Find those people and arrest them all. Okay. Beta Persei became excited when he heard that there was a chance to make a move. By the way, young master, how many people can I bring? Take 10 guards with you, then ask Tiger Mang for a battalion of soldiers. That should be enough. Isn't it just 300 Baiming soldiers? By the way, don't make too much noise when you arrest them. Bring them back when you find them. Yang Qindong chuckled. He obviously had a general idea in his mind. Since Baiming himself had such a loophole, he would certainly take advantage of it. He wanted to know something from these soldiers. Beta Persei did not know the specific thoughts in Yang Qindong's mind, but since it was an order from the sixth young master, he just had to execute it to the letter. He nodded and agreed. After a while, he turned around and left the inner court. Chapter 762. Brother Beta Persei, what are you doing in such a hurry? Did something good happen? Seeing Beta Persei's anxious look, Ba Daojiang and Peng Yu, who were not on duty, saw it. The relationship between the two of them had always been good and they were always inseparable. Seeing the two of them, Beta Persei's eyes lit up. The sixth young master gave me a task and I'm going to complete it. How about this, both of you, and 8 brothers will come together. Fuyun Restaurant was one of the top 5 restaurants in the beginning city. It covered an area of more than 10,000 square meters and had more than 200 tables. In particular, there was a large open space in the middle of the restaurant with a cement floor. It was perfect for performing some large-scale programs. As early as a month ago, Fuyun Restaurant had contacted the publicity department and wanted to invite them to perform in the restaurant. Today was the official day. Since the morning, all the tables in the restaurant had been occupied. Even so, there were still many people who wanted to buy a place to stand with silver. For a moment, the restaurant owner was so happy that he could not close his mouth. At about 9 o'clock in the morning, the staff of the publicity department who were ready at the back of the restaurant had already made all the preparations. As the director, Qing kept walking in front of the girls of the publicity department, repeatedly telling them not to be nervous. When the performance started, they just had to perform according to the usual rehearsal. A group of very beautiful girls, each of them wearing the military uniform of the Cold Front, with beautiful berets on their heads, looked valiant and heroic. Today, they were going to perform the scene where the god of war commanded the army to defeat Agadorji of the Tartar tribe. Of course, they could not perform the entire scene. They only chose the moment when the entire army charged. In order to achieve a sufficient stage effect, Qing mobilized a total of 220 girls of the publicity department. In other words, not only were all the 200 students recruited later on, but also some of the cultural backbone staff from Crimson City. This was to create a magnificent scene with many soldiers and generals. Since everyone had to go on stage, Qikij was naturally one of them. Not only did she have to go on stage, but she also had to appear as a character with status and lines. Qikij had a heavy responsibility on her shoulders. The reason why she was able to stand out so quickly was inseparable from her usual hard work, and naturally, it was inseparable from her current identity. As for Beta Persei, after he fell in love with Qikij, he told everything to the sixth young master. After getting his consent, he asked for advice on what to do. Perhaps in his eyes, the sixth young master was omnipotent. The answer given by Yang Qindong was simple: chase after her. To put it bluntly, he had to be thick-skinned, show more concern, and interact more. After a round of pestering, his chances of success would increase by a lot. This was the reason why a good girl was afraid of a pestering man. Beta Persei naturally carried out Yang Qindong's orders to the letter. Whenever he had time, he would come to the publicity office. At the very beginning, it was under the pretext of inspecting work, but after a long time, even Qing knew that this favorite of the sixth young master liked the little girl Qikage. Naturally, he gave the green light. When everyone knew about this matter, Qikage's identity and status also stood out. Even director Qing was polite to her, because everyone knew how powerful pillow talk was. Fifth brother Yang had a high position and power in Crimson City, not to mention brother Beta Persei, who was in a higher position than him. With Qing's care, coupled with her dancing foundation, her figure was very good, and her appearance was very decent. It was impossible for Qikage not to stand out. This time, she was entrusted with a heavy responsibility and arranged to play a very good role. This was not the first time Qikage had gone on stage. A week ago, she had performed for a while in the largest immortal abode restaurant in the first city, and her performance at that time was very good. But this did not prevent her from being nervous this time. Before going on stage, she was still constantly taking deep breaths, forcing herself to calm down. The backstage was nervously and orderly preparing. The hall of the Fuyun building was even more crowded. Nie Zhengyi and the others, who were mixed in the crowd, were anxiously waiting. They rushed out of the inn, and then came to the Fuyun building at the fastest speed. At the door, they paid a certain amount of silver. It could be said that after taking out all the silver they had the opportunity to squeeze in. Speaking of which, he was lucky to have some silver on him. Compared to some of the other Baiming soldiers who had escaped, most of them were blocked outside the restaurant because they did not have enough silver. If they were in the Datong prefecture, perhaps those soldiers would find ways to cause trouble to express their dissatisfaction, but when they saw the mercenary warriors standing in front of the Fuyun building, they did not have any thoughts of causing trouble. This was other people's territory, and they were facing the legendary elite mercenary warriors. They really did not have the courage to test the law. Finally, it was 9:00 in the morning, and the performance began. On the 300 square meter concrete stage, a loud horn sounded, and 60 to 70 warriors with excellent figures rushed from the backstage to the performance platform. One flag after another was waved in their hands. Just this appearance alone attracted waves of cheers from the people below the stage. Perhaps it was because of the tall and straight figures of the female soldiers, or perhaps it was because the heroic spirit on their faces was not much inferior to the men, or perhaps it was because of their good looks, but they received a full house of applause as soon as they went on stage. Among the people who cheered were Nie Zhengyi and some of his companions. Amidst the cheers, the female soldiers with lines began their performance. Through their mouths, they explained the matter of the Tatar army besieging the city with nearly 50,000 soldiers. Then, they showed that the mercenary warriors were not afraid of difficulties, were not afraid of life and death, and were brave enough to fight. After all, it was a performance. Due to the influence of the venue and the surrounding environment, it was impossible to perfectly show every battle. It was just a description of some special battles. But even so, it still made the audience below the stage very excited. Cheers came one after another, and it didn't stop from the beginning. Fuyun restaurant was very lively. Outside the restaurant, Beta Persei arrived with 10 guards and a battalion of 400 soldiers from the independent regiment. Since Beta Persei was personally mobilizing the troops, Deputy Regiment Commander Xin Honghai naturally had to cooperate. He personally led a battalion of soldiers to express his sincerity. When they arrived outside the restaurant, they saw more than 200 soldiers wearing the Baiming army uniform outside the door. Arrest them all, kill those who resist. Beta Persei only glanced at them for a moment before issuing the military order. Immediately, the soldiers led by him rushed towards the Baiming soldiers who were still stretching their necks, trying to make a move in the restaurant. Before they could figure out what was going on, these soldiers had become prisoners. Some of the brave Baiming soldiers did not resist when they saw that the mercenary warriors were arresting them. They only shouted, "Why are you arresting us?" We followed the Baiming messengers to your place. You can't treat us like this. Their reply was to gag them and then take them away on the street. They were all tied up and had black cloth gagged over their mouths. More than 200 people did not resist and quickly disappeared outside the restaurant. Beta Persei did not even look at these people. He only stared at the inside of Fuyun restaurant and asked the company commander in charge of the security of the propaganda department, how many Baiming soldiers entered the restaurant. About 60 or 70 people. They are very easy to recognize. They are all wearing the Baiming uniform. The company commander stood at attention, saluted and replied respectfully. Good, you guys guard outside. If you find any Baiming soldiers who have escaped, take them down immediately. If there is any resistance, you can take measures. Hearing that so many people had entered the restaurant, Beta Persei's eyes darkened, and a murderous aura emanated from his body. This time, there was Kikage in the performance. Last night, she had someone send a message to him, hoping that he could come and watch her performance. Just from this point alone, the progress of their relationship was still very smooth. However, Beta Persei did not immediately agree. Following by Yang Qindong's side was a heavy responsibility, and he could not even grasp his own free time. But now, 60 or 70 Baiming soldiers were in the restaurant. If they had the intention of destroying this performance, wouldn't Kikage be in danger? He thought that if someone really did that, he would not mind starting a massacre. I hope you guys are just watching a performance. If you have other ideas, you will definitely regret coming to this world. After making up his mind, Beta Persei called the deputy commander of the independent regiment, Xin Honghai. After discussing with him, they decided on a plan to enter the restaurant and capture the people. It's best not to make a move if you can. After all, there are still many people inside who are watching the show. Thinking that the sixth young master was very protective of the people under his rule, Yang Qindong reminded everyone to wait. At this time, inside the Fuyun restaurant, the performance had already lasted for more than an hour and was now coming to an end. They had broken the Tatar army's attack and defeated the enemy. Now was the time to cheer for the victory. The sun sets in the west, the red clouds fly in the sky. The soldiers are shooting, the camp is back, the camp is back, comrades in arms are as close as brothers. Victory has summoned us together. You are from Tiannan, he is from Hebei. We are all brothers of the god of war. One after another, military songs that stirred the hearts of the people resounded on the stage. Under the chorus of the actresses, who were full of 5 tones, it brought climax after climax to the people present. The people who were encouraged by the performance clapped their hands until they were red, but the applause still continued. Nie Zhengyi was also mixed in the crowd. His eyes were shining, and his heart was filled with excitement. After watching this performance, Nie Zhengyi was deeply encouraged. Although time was limited, such a novel performance was the first time he had seen in his life. This kind of performance method was unheard of in the future. Even if the time was short, it still made him extremely excited and even deeply affected. Chapter 763. This was a real army. They were fearless in the face of a strong enemy and used all means on the battlefield. The soldiers were united and sincere. Only those who grew up in such an army could be called a real soldier. Only those who grew up in such an army could talk about great ideals. In comparison, the Baiming Datong prefecture he was in was far inferior. They only dared to attack when the enemy was few and far in between, as if they were afraid of angering the other party. When the enemy came in large numbers, they would turn around and flee without even fighting. They didn't have the slightest bit of courage to face difficulties. Anyone with ability and ideas could determine the strength of the enemy. At this moment, Nie Zhengyi's eyes were filled with envy. But when he thought about how he was a member of the Baiming army, and a centurion at that, the hot blood that had surged out of his body was forcefully suppressed. Sigh, this is just a dream. In the future, it's better to go back and be a centurion. Sighing like this, Nie Zhengyi slowly lowered his head. It was unknown whether he was lamenting his bad luck or lamenting that he was born at the wrong time. At this moment, a strong murderous aura suddenly attacked him. Nie Zhengyi, who had practiced martial arts since he was young and had a good physique, instinctively dodged to the left. A large hand slid down where he was standing just now. Thinking that it was close, he suddenly turned around and saw a soldier in a green military uniform standing behind him. At this moment, both sides looked at each other and saw each other clearly. The soldier from the independent regiment felt a burst of red in his face that his attack had failed. Seeing that most of his comrades had succeeded in one strike, reaching out to control the target he was staring at, but he had failed, this feeling made him very unhappy. "Brat, I don't care who you are. If you surrender now, you can still live. If you resist, you'll be asking for trouble." Since the sneak attack had failed, the soldier from the independent regiment didn't hold back and directly put forward his own request. No matter what, Nie Zhengyi was still a centurion. How could he allow himself to be captured just because of one sentence? Although he had disobeyed a military order this time, it should be Chiliarch Su Dei who came forward to capture him. How could it be a mercenary army that made a move on him? "I didn't cause any trouble. Why are you arresting me?" He would not allow himself to be captured, but he also did not want to fight with the mercenaries. He knew how powerful they were, and the performance just now had given him a whole new understanding of them. "It's not up to you to decide whether or not you committed a crime. Please come back with us." Sensing the unyielding aura emanating from Nie Zhengyi, the soldier from the independent regiment didn't choose to attack directly. Instead, he wanted to use words to make Nie Zhengyi surrender. "That's impossible. I'm a centurion of Baiming. I can't go back with you." Nie Zhengyi shook his head. He didn't know what they meant. However, he knew that once he was caught, he would be a captive and would lose his freedom. This was not what he wanted. "Then don't blame me." Seeing that Nie Zhengyi wasn't listening to them, the soldiers of the independent regiment could only shake their heads. They didn't care that there were still some commoners around them who didn't know what was going on and directly grabbed Nie Zhengyi. At this time, the performance was coming to an end. A group of female soldiers from the publicity department were lining up on the stage to take their curtain call. The audience below the stage was enthusiastically applauding, affirming the other party's wonderful performance this time. However, it was at this time that the sound of fighting came from below the stage, attracting everyone's attention for a moment. There were nearly 70 Baiming soldiers in the crowd watching the performance. About 60 of them were locked down and subdued at the first moment. After all, the Baiming army uniforms they were wearing were too eye-catching. However, there were still 9 people who were resisting, and they all had some strength. Among them, Nie Zhengyi's fight was the fiercest and the fastest to end. Bang! A fist collided with a fist, and the soldier from the independent regiment was knocked back 2 steps. Then, a long leg kicked him in the chest, causing him to stumble back again. If it weren't for the fact that there were still many commoners standing behind him, he would have fallen to the ground. After repelling the soldiers of the independent regiment, Nie Zhengyi instinctively wanted to escape. However, he quickly shook his head helplessly because he didn't know when, but he realized that there were already 4 mercenary soldiers standing beside him. They were staring at him covetously. Suddenly, the sound of fighting came from the crowd. Waves of screams could not be stopped from coming from the Fuyun building. Even on the stage, some of the female soldiers were trembling all over. It was one thing for them to fight and kill on the show, but it was another thing for them to fight in real life. Restlessness began to appear, but it was quickly suppressed. The commoners had already noticed that many mercenary soldiers had appeared on the scene. They were all tall and sturdy, and their eyes were fierce. The appearance of these people gave everyone a sense of relief. Some people were extremely excited. When they watched the performance just now, everything was rehearsed. How could it be as exciting as a real fight between dragons and tigers? Some of the bolder ones even found a good seat and sat down, as if this was the real show they were going to watch today. On the stage, Beta Persei appeared with 10 of his guards. As soon as he appeared, the publicity director Qing hurriedly walked over. Brother Beta Persei, what's going on? It's fine, it's just a small matter. Beta Persei's face revealed a confident expression. He first nodded at Qing, then at Qikage, who was looking at him affectionately. Then, he shouted at the top of his lungs, everyone, pay attention. I'm Beta Persei from the Yang residence. This place has been controlled by the mercenaries. Everyone, don't panic, and there's no need to be crowded. This matter will be over soon. Everyone, just treat it as a free show. Beta Persei's voice was already loud to begin with, and this shout from his dantian was even louder. Sure enough, with this shout, the crowd quieted down a lot. Although most people didn't know Beta Persei, he said that he was from the Yang residence. Wasn't that someone by the god of war's side? Even the god of war had sent someone, what else did they have to worry about? After Beta Persei revealed his identity, the hot-tempered commoners quickly quieted down. Then, they all looked at the fighting scene with the mentality of watching a show. In the resistance of the 9 people, 4 of them were quickly subdued. Only 5 people, including Nie Zhengyi, were still fighting with the independent regiment. Nie Zhengyi was fighting 1 against 4 and was already at a disadvantage. With his ability, the soldiers of the independent regiment wouldn't be able to gain any advantage in a one-on-one fight, but it was hard to say if it was 1 against 4. He was having a hard time holding on and felt that the world was unfair. Seeing that everyone's eyes were on him, he thought of a plan and shouted, "What's wrong? Aren't the mercenaries very powerful? Why are you playing the trick of winning with numbers? Don't you dare to have a fair one-on-one fight with me?" Logically speaking, it was unreasonable to shout like that. On the battlefield, the most important thing was to kill and defeat the enemy. Who cared how many people you had? If you had fewer people, it only proved that you were not capable enough. But this wasn't a battlefield and there were so many commoners watching. Nie Zhengyi's shout attracted a lot of discussion and actually gained the support of some people. Deputy Commander Xin Honghai, who was commanding the soldiers, was startled when he heard this. He didn't think that there would be such a smart person among the Baiming soldiers who knew how to take advantage of the situation. He couldn't help but look at Nie Zhengyi and think about what to say. But before Xin Honghai could say anything, Beta Persei, who was standing on the performance stage, had already spoken. On the battlefield, only life and death matters. No one will talk to me about fairness. But since you want a one-on-one fight, I'll fulfill your wish. Ba Daojiang, go test his ability. Be careful, don't kill him. This person has some ability and should be someone with a position. Yes, Brother Beta Persei. Hearing that there was a chance to show off his skills, Ba Daojiang immediately grinned and nodded excitedly. He took the task and strode towards the fighting field. With Beta Persei's shout, the 4 independent soldiers who were attacking at the same time stopped. Their faces were all red. They felt that it was a humiliation that they couldn't take down their opponent after such a long time. But since Brother Beta Persei had given the order, they had no choice but to obey. Beta Persei's shout attracted everyone's attention and they fell on Ba Daojiang, who was walking down the performance stage step by step. Ba Daojiang came from the underworld and his boxing skills were unparalleled. Later, he joined Yang Xia and became a guard by the 6th Young Master's side. He even had the opportunity to receive guidance from Yang Qindong. His strength was no longer the same as before. Now that he had a chance to show off in front of everyone, he would definitely grab hold of this opportunity. First, he strode forward. His target seemed to be Nie Zhengyi. However, as he was walking, he happened to encounter a Baiming squad leader who was locked in a fight with an independent soldier. When he walked past, he suddenly threw a punch. Caught off guard, the Baiming squad leader blocked it with his own fist. However, it was precisely this attack that sent him flying. His body landed 3 to 4 meters behind him before he could land. His face was contorted in pain and a trace of blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth. It was obvious that this punch had caused him serious internal injuries. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the independent soldier who was fighting with him stepped forward and subdued him. With just one punch, he had defeated a Biming squad leader who had the ability to fight for a long time. This blow first caused the audience to fall silent. Then, there was a round of applause, expressing everyone's admiration for Ba Daojiang. Ba Daojiang cupped his fists at the audience with a smile on his face. After that, he continued to move forward. Another Biming squad leader was sent flying with a punch. This forced the other two Biming soldiers who were still fighting to stop and let themselves be restrained. They had already seen how powerful Ba Daojiang was and knew that they were no match for him. There was no point in asking for trouble. Chapter 764. With that, Nie Jingyi was the only one left standing on the stage. However, his expression was extremely solemn. It was obvious that he had seen through Ba Daojiang's strength. In just a short while, Ba Daojiang had already appeared in front of Nie Jingyi. He then asked in a disdainful tone, "Kid, do you want to take a punch or surrender? Let's fight. It's rare to meet an opponent like you." Facing Ba Daojiang's strong pressure, Nie Jingyi did not choose to retreat. Instead, he moved one of his shoulders, showing that he would not surrender and would fight to the end. All right. Ba Daojiang was still afraid that his opponent would give in. If that happened, he would not be able to enjoy the fight. Now, Nie Jingyi's choice was exactly what he wanted. Laughing loudly, he suddenly dashed to Nie Jingyi's side and threw a punch. Nie Jingyi, who had been observing Ba Daojiang's movements, quickly dodged to the side when he saw the punch coming towards his right shoulder. At the same time, he kicked out with his long leg. Having seen Ba Daojiang's moves, Nie Jingyi would not be stupid enough to take his punch head-on. Boom! The kick landed on Ba Daojiang's waist, and the two separated immediately after the contact. In the first round, Nie Jingyi gained the upper hand with a kick. On the other hand, Ba Daojiang missed his punch and even suffered a kick. It was obvious that he had lost points. "Ba Daojiang, can you do it?" The sixth young master has said more than once that even a lion uses its full strength to catch a rabbit. If you are careless again, you should retreat. Beta Persei, who was on the stage, saw everything clearly. Nie Jingyi did have some skills and his body was agile enough. However, the main reason he was kicked was because of his carelessness. Beta Persei's reprimand made Ba Daojiang's face turn red. "Brother Beta Persei, give me one more chance. I will definitely take care of this kid." Ba Daojiang was determined, but at the same time, he raised his guard. He rushed forward again, his eyes fixed on Nie Jingyi's body. At this moment, Nie Jingyi's body tensed up. Although he seemed to have gained the upper hand in the first round, the rebounding force of his kick was not weak. He could still feel the numbness in his legs. This also proved the strength of the Eight Paths River. Right now, the other party's heart was filled with caution, staring at him, giving Nie Jingyi the feeling of being stared at by a fierce tiger. It was as if no matter what he did next, he would not be able to avoid the other party's attention, and would not be able to succeed. Nie Jingyi was shocked by Ba Daojiang's aura, and he didn't dare to act rashly. Ba Daojiang didn't care about that. His body moved forward, and his fists rushed forward. His hands were like two dragons emerging from the sea, and it seemed as if he was only attacking and not defending. However, Nie Jingyi could not be fooled by this illusion. Facing the Ba Daojiang that was prepared, if he chose to attack now, he would definitely suffer. After all, their strengths were not on the same line. There was still a huge gap between them. Tong tong tong. Nie Jingyi didn't dare to attack again. Facing the two fists that were rushing towards him, he could only defend. Then, the long fists smashed on his body. Every time they hit, he couldn't help but grimace in pain. It was really unbearable. After a dozen punches like this, when Nie Jingyi felt that he couldn't lift his arms anymore, Ba Daojiang once again used a strong grappling hand. After pressing down on Nie Jingyi's neck, he threw Nie Jingyi out. Nie Zhengyi, who was already in a daze from the beating, tried his best to land on his back to reduce the pain he might suffer. Just as he landed and let out a muffled groan, another 2 soldiers from the independent regiment came over and held him down, completely subduing him. Take away all the troublemakers. Beta Persei, who was standing on the stage, waved his hand. Then, he nodded gently at the publicity director Shui Qing and gave Kikij a reassuring look. He then strode out of the Fuyun building surrounded by Peng Yu and the others. Not long after Beta Persei and the others left, Zhang Quan and Su Dei rushed over with dozens of Baiming soldiers. However, the answer they received was that Baiming soldiers were causing trouble here and had all been taken away. If they wanted to get them, they would have to go to the beginning city's barracks. Zhang Quan didn't dare to go to the beginning city's barracks. With just Su Dei and the dozens of people he brought, they wouldn't even be enough to fill the gaps between the enemy's teeth. Helpless, he thought of Yu Mian. At this moment, he could only ask for help from the city lord's mansion. Besides, the 300 Baiming soldiers were taken away in confusion. They were then taken to the mercenary barracks outside the South City. Here, they were detained separately and interrogated repeatedly. The general idea was that they left the Datong city's diplomatic mission without permission. Were they trying to pry into the secrets of the mercenaries and the city's defense, etc.? Faced with such a crime that could be beheaded, all the Baiming soldiers shook their heads like a rattle drum. They were really just curious about the show they were going to star in. That was why they had the courage to rush out of the inn. They really didn't have any other intentions. Putting aside how anxious and defensive the 300 Baiming soldiers were, Nie Zhengyi, who had been taught a lesson by Ba Daojiang, felt a little dizzy. Then, he was taken to a very quiet place with a black mask on his head. The reason why it was very quiet was because he could no longer hear any sound in his ears. After an unknown amount of time, he finally heard footsteps. Then, the black mask on his head was taken off. While feeling the dazzling sunlight in front of him, Nie Zhengyi also saw a very young man standing in front of him. The young man had a smile on his face and looked at him with interest. At the same time, he was also sizing up the person who had come. He was young, handsome, and had an indescribable temperament. It felt like he was as heavy as a mountain and as wide as the sea. Even though he was smiling, he still gave Nie Zhengyi a great deal of pressure. Who are you? When Nie Zhengyi saw that Beta Persei, who had previously commanded the troops, was standing beside the young man, and looked like a servant, his instincts told him that the young man in front of him was definitely not a simple person. Impudent! How dare you casually ask questions in front of the great Ming's Duke of Loyalty? Before the young man could answer, Beta Persei's roar had already sounded. Great Ming's Duke of Loyalty. Hearing this, Nie Zhengyi's legs went soft and he knelt on the ground with a plop. This was not to say that he did not have a backbone, but that Yang Qindong's name had already resounded throughout the Great Ming. Even in the Datong Prefecture's military camp, the soldiers often talked about this topic when they had nothing to do. In the hearts of the soldiers, this Duke of Loyalty had long been a legend and had become a synonym for strength and invincibility. You've heard of me? Seeing Nie Zhengyi kneeling in front of him, Yang Qindong's face did not change at all. Perhaps he had long been used to all of this. Yes, I've heard of the Duke of Loyalty and know that you're very good at fighting. As Nie Zhengyi answered, he was also a little excited. He could actually meet the Duke of Loyalty in person and even talk to him. This was something he had never dared to dream of before. At this moment, Nie Zhengyi was like a 7th-ranked county magistrate who had been summoned by the emperor. His heart was only filled with excitement and excitement. Hee, my level of fighting is just average. It's mainly because the soldiers under me put their lives on the line that I'm able to achieve glory time and time again. Yang Qindong said with a modest face. Nie Zhengyi did not seem to agree with this point of view. Perhaps it was because he had understood some things in the city yesterday, but he could not help but say, that's also the ability of the Duke of Loyalty. Furthermore, you love your soldiers like your children. To be able to become your subordinate is a matter of happiness and pride. How could they not put their lives on the line? These words, which seemed to be a bit of bootlicking, caused young Qingdong to burst into laughter. Yes, I know you. You're called Nie Zhengyi, right? I didn't expect you to be so good with words. In that case, if you were given a chance, would you want to join the mercenary army? The Duke of Loyalty actually knew him and even took the initiative to recruit him. This honor immediately made Nie Zhengyi extremely excited. However, in his mind, he suddenly thought of his mother in the Datong prefecture. Although his father had died in the battle with the Walla a few years ago, and although he had not married a wife because of his pride, he still had a mother who lived in the Datong prefecture. If he joined the mercenary army now, what would his mother do? Once the Ming army and the embroidered uniform guards found out, his mother would most likely be doomed. Nie Zhengyi's expression constantly changed. Yang Qingdong only sized him up and did not have any intention of urging him. After a few breaths of time, Nie Zhengyi raised his head and said very seriously, Duke, although I really envy the treatment of the mercenary army and admire your courage in defeating the enemies of the grassland, I still cannot join the mercenary army. Is it because of your mother? Yang Qingdong waited for Nie Zhengyi to finish speaking before asking with a smile. You know this too. Nie Zhengyi's face revealed a surprised expression. How could he have known that not long after they left Datong Prefecture, the intelligence personnel of the Security Bureau received the news? They reported the situation to the higher-ups of the Security Bureau and informed the First City. At the same time, they also began to investigate the entourage. And Nie Zhengyi was the main target of the research, so his situation was naturally investigated very clearly. Hee. Of course I know. I also know that you were born in the military, I know that you are very filial, and I also know that you have very high standards. This year, you are 25 years old and still haven't married. This is not because you can't afford to marry, but because you haven't met the right one. How about it? After watching the performance of our female soldiers today, they all have good figures and good looks. Is there anyone you like? Chapter 765. Yang Qingdong smiled faintly as he spoke. Every time he said a word, Nie Zhengyi could not help but shiver. The Duke of Loyalty was really omniscient. He even knew the situation of a small centurion like Nie Zhengyi. Didn't that mean that the background of the 1,000-man diplomatic group had long been known? Nie Zhengyi was still in shock. But when he heard Yang Qingdong's next words, he was so shocked that his mouth opened so wide that an egg could be stuffed in. What if I told you that even if you joined the mercenary army, your mother would still be fine, and I would allow you to choose an unmarried female soldier as your wife? What would you choose? Is there such a good thing? Nie Zhengyi was indeed shocked and could not help but ask. I don't think I need to lie to you with my status. Yang Qingdong did not answer directly, but this sentence was the answer. What was Yang Qingdong's status? Even the Emperor of Baiming and the Emperor of Southern Ming were very afraid of him. Even the King of the Grassland, Yes Hen, would be frightened when he heard his name. How could such a person casually joke with a small centurion like Nie Zhengyi? As soon as he asked this question, Nie Zhengyi knew that he was overthinking. Since there was such a good thing, there was no reason for him to refuse. He immediately knelt on the ground and kowtowed 3 times to Yang Qingdong and said, Your subordinate, Nie Zhengyi, is willing to join the mercenary group and serve the Duke for life. Good. Nie Zhengyi finally made his choice. Yang Qingdong was overjoyed and walked forward to help him up. Then, he looked at him and said, Not bad. Looking at your pure eyes, you must be a man of your words. Since that's the case, I will accept you. Nie Zhengyi was convinced by Yang Qingdong, but he didn't stay in the beginning city. Instead, he was released along with the 300 Baiming soldiers and returned to the inn. In other words, Nie Zhengyi was loyal to Yang Qingdong, but the nature of his work was different. He had become a chess piece buried in the Datong prefecture. Normally, he would pass on important military information, but at critical times, he could play a decisive role. Yang Qingdong treated Nie Zhengyi quite well. He directly proposed that after returning to the Datong prefecture, there would be a specialized person in charge of his affairs. There would also be a specialized person who would contact him. This way, they could do their best to prevent his identity from being exposed and putting him in danger. At the same time, he also prepared a lot of money for Nie Zhengyi. Yang Qindong only had one request, and that was to bribe his superiors as soon as possible, and then continue to be promoted. The position of a mere centurion was still too light. What Yang Qindong wanted was a general who held real power and could come into contact with more secrets. Nie Zhengyi also guaranteed this. He did not doubt his own ability, he was still so young, and was already a centurion. This was enough to explain everything. If he had gold and silver to clear the way, he was very confident that he would be able to charge up in a short period of time and obtain a higher position. Zhang Quan went to the city lord's mansion, and not long after, Yu Mian personally went to the barracks to communicate. He took back the 300 captured Baiming soldiers. What Zhang Quan and Su Dei did not expect was that none of the 300 Baiming soldiers returned with injuries. In other words, they were only interrogated when they went to the mercenary barracks, and were not interrogated. On this point, Su Dei was very emotional. He felt that the mercenaries were indeed an army that followed the rules, and only this kind of army would be able to fight against the Mongol cavalry and win every battle. Humph! They are just ordinary soldiers. How could they be valued by the mercenaries? Zhang Quan had a different opinion. He felt that it was because the captured soldiers were too low-level that they did not attract the interest of the mercenaries. This was the end of the farce. According to Nie Zhengyi's previous thoughts, neither Zhang Quan nor Su Dei punished the 300 soldiers, and only gave them a warning. It was very reasonable that the law could not punish the masses. After the farce, Zhang Quan and Su Dei went to the city lord's mansion again. They had wasted another day for nothing, and the negotiations still had to continue. In the Yang mansion, Yang Qindong was deep in thought with his eyes closed. Beta Persei stood at the side, not daring to say a word. Only when there was movement outside the door and Tiger's Mane's figure appeared did Beta Persei leave the house with light steps. What's going on? What happened? Tiger's Mane heard from the guards that the sixth young master did not even have dinner after returning from a trip. He hurriedly rushed over from the barracks. At this moment, he was naturally asking Beta Persei, who had been staying by the sixth young master's side. This is hard to say. Beta Persei shook his head, not knowing how to answer. What do you mean by hard to say? Just say what you have to say. Tiger's Mane glared at Beta Persei, as if he was questioning him. Tiger's Mane's loyalty to Yang Qindong was naturally unquestionable. If there was only one person in the army who did not betray Yang Qindong, it must be Tiger's Mane. Because of this, Beta Persei also trusted him very much. He immediately told him about how the sixth young master left the mansion and privately went to the barracks to meet Nie Zhengyi. Tiger's Mane, as soon as the young master appeared, Nie Zhengyi was subdued, but at the same time, he also said some things about the Datong mansion. According to him, the upper echelons of Baiming have been saying bad things about the young master in the army. They have always said that the young master is a traitor and have been on guard against him. And I heard that many soldiers in the Baiming army believe this. Beta Persei's answer finally made Tiger's Mane understand what had happened. Before, he didn't know, so he wasn't worried. But now that he knew, he smiled and said, I thought it was something big. Don't worry, young master is very broad-minded. He definitely won't worry about such a small matter. Yes, the young master will not worry about such a small matter, but not long ago, the Security Bureau sent a report about the Baiming Imperial Court. I heard that many people there have put forward a proposal, saying that they want to order the newer Gandu Sea to cut off our supply route from the sea. What, they really dare? Hearing this, even Tiger's Mane's expression changed, and then he glared at Beta Persei. Why don't you say it all at once? You have to say it one by one, humph. After saying this, Tiger's Mane strode into the house. As soon as he entered the room, he came in front of Yang Qindong and said, Young master, "Don't worry, I'll immediately take the independent regiment to the newer Gandu. Didn't they want to cut off our supply route? Then we'll flatten them first." Yang Qindong, who had been sitting on the chair with his eyes closed, opened his eyes at this moment. The independent regiment has such a strong combat power that they can destroy the entire Baiming army in the newer Gandu with their strength alone? They can also control every city and ensure the safety of our supply route? We can't do it. Even though Tiger's Mane was so confident, he could not help but say with a bitter face at this moment. The intelligence of the Security Bureau had long recorded that there were many Baiming guards in the newer Gandu area. Their military strength was about hundreds of thousands of people, and they were very widely distributed. The furthest two guards were thousands of miles apart. With such a large territory, how could an independent regiment occupy it so easily? Not to mention the independent regiment, even if the army in the beginning city was sent over now, they might be able to defeat the Baiming guards, but it was impossible to occupy that place and maintain the stability there. That place was too big, and there were too many guards. Unless they had enough military strength, they would not be able to control it. Not to mention, Yang Qindong was not ready to fall out with Baiming. According to him, whether it was Baiming or Southern Ming, they were all made up of Han people. In the future, if he wanted to lead the Han people to the top of the world, a strong population base was essential. Unless it was necessary, he did not want to make things difficult for the Han people, and he did not want to be enemies with the Han army. Otherwise, this was equivalent to digging his own foundation. In a situation where he did not want to fight, if the Baiming imperial court really ordered to block the supply route, Yang Qindong would really suffer. After all, the ability of the beginning city to self-produce was too low. If there was no continuous supply of resources from Qiqian City, not to mention developing on the grassland, even surviving would be a problem. Tiger's Mane did not speak, and Yang Qindong once again fell into silence. He now needed to think of a way to stop the Baiming imperial court from giving orders to the newer Gandu area. As for how to do this, it was truly a difficult matter. The negotiation was still going on in the city lord's mansion, and it was getting smoother. Perhaps it was because Zhang Quan's attitude was very firm, but in the end, Yu Mian still took a step back. He did not have the intention to ask the other party for military pay. Of course, Zhang Quan also did not mention that the beginning city would be under the management of the Baiming imperial court. In the end, the two sides reached an agreement, and that was to issue a joint statement to the outside world that the Datong prefecture and the beginning city were allies. If one side was in trouble, the other side would unconditionally send troops to support. The agreement was finally reached. Presumably, after knowing this news, Yes Hen had to consider more things when he wanted to take action. This made Zhang Quan seem to be very satisfied. After completing his mission, he rejected Yu Mian's suggestion to stay in the first city for a few more days and left the city with the 1,000 guards he had brought with him. After Yu Mian sent Zhang Quan off, he strode to the Yang mansion to meet Yang Qindong. In the hall of the Yang mansion, Yang Qindong looked at the joint statement made by the two sides and smiled. "It's just a piece of waste paper." Yang Qindong said this for a reason. The statement only said that the two sides were allies. If one side was in trouble, the other side would provide support. However, it did not specify how many reinforcements would be sent. In other words, if one side was really in trouble, the other side could send 10,000 people, 1,000 people, or even 100 people. With such a big loophole in front of him, Yang Qindong did not believe that Yu Mian and Zhang Quan would not be able to see it. However, both sides did not point it out. This already meant a lot. Chapter 766. Ignoring such a big loophole and pretending not to see it, this already showed that both sides were just putting on a show. They just wanted to use the tiger's skin to scare the other side. However, Yang Qindong could also understand that information was so undeveloped. Even if one side was attacked, by the time the news reached the other side's ears, it would be too late. What was the point of sending reinforcements? Yu Mian naturally understood this logic. He also understood that Zhang Quan only wanted righteousness. He wanted to use the first city to deter some of the Mongolian troops who wanted to attack the Datong prefecture. As for sending reinforcements, it was better to forget about it. In the past few days, he had heard more than once that the mercenaries' food was so good that it was not much worse than that of a eunuch like him. Just the food alone was something that the Datong prefecture could not afford. In any case, the negotiation finally came to an end. Yu Mian could be considered to have completed a political task. While he relaxed, he also focused his attention on another matter. He looked at Yang Qindong and asked, "Sixth young master, have you really made up your mind to take over Tulu city?" "Yes, I have to take over that place. Previously, I sent people from the Security Bureau to investigate the situation there. The information has been reported back. There are only 10,000 Tatar troops that belong to Tuachuo Buhua. 5,000 of them are infantry. In front of the mercenaries, it is not worth mentioning." Yang Qindong admitted with a smile. Since he could say this, it was obvious that he had made up his mind. Although Yu Mian was the governor, his power was much lower than Yang Qindong's. There were some things that he only had the right to suggest but not the right to make decisions. Now that he heard that Yang Qindong seemed to have made up his mind, he carefully said, "Sixth young master, Tulu city is a barrier to the northwest of Baiming. It is also a buffer zone between us. Once we break through there, there will be no obstacles between us. We can see swords and spears at any time." "Yes. What I want is to see swords and spears at any time. Let me tell you this. I have received news that the Baiming Imperial Court is considering giving an order to Gandu to cut off our logistical supply route. If this is the case, what about the army's provisions? What about the security of the first city? They forced me to do this." Yang Qindong said this with a helpless look. After he finished speaking, he said something that shocked Yu Mian. "This time, not only do I want to break through Tulu city, but I also want to personally go to Baiming's capital. There are some people that I want to meet." "Ah. No. Yu Mian was really frightened this time. He said with a panicked expression, "Sixth young master, a gentleman does not stand under a dangerous wall. If the Baiming Imperial Court really wants to deal with you, if something happens in their territory, the entire Yangxia Empire will be in chaos." Seeing that Yu Mian was so anxious, Yang Qindong was very gratified. At least this meant that the other party was really looking out for him. He said confidently, "Don't worry. As long as we occupy Tulu city, it is equivalent to opening the door to the northwest of Baiming's capital. Unless the other party has made the decision to fight to the death with the mercenaries, they will not dare to touch me casually. Besides, I've already given orders to the Security Bureau and Crimson City. Some elite Cold Vanguard soldiers will enter the capital as soon as possible. A regiment of elite Cold Vanguard soldiers should be enough to intimidate the enemy." Yang Qindong waved his hand nonchalantly. To others, entering Baiming's capital at this time might be extremely dangerous. However, to Datsang, Yang Qindong was really nothing. Unless the other party could kill him in an instant, as long as he was given a little time to react, no one would be able to kill him. Yang Qindong was so confident that he made a decision. Yu Mian knew that there was nothing he could say. The only thing he could do was to take care of the city during the time when the sixth young master was not in the first city. Let this city develop quickly and not let people worry about it would be a great merit. And just 3 days after Yu Mian and Yang Qindong met, there was a big movement in the first city's military camp. The 3 divisions of the Cold Front and the fully replenished Jurchen cavalry regiment finally set off. This time, they would leave the first city and go all the way north, straight to the Siberia area controlled by the Golden Horde. They would fight the so-called Golden Family head-on. And for this expedition, Yang Qindong had provided 200 carriages of military supplies. In the Yang residence, in front of Yang Qindong stood the commander of the 3 divisions, Wu Sheng, the political commissar Chen Bo, the 3rd Regiment Changyang, and the commander of the Jurchen Cavalry Regiment, Yila. Yang Qindong looked at Wu Sheng and the other 3 and asked in a deep voice, "This expedition is of great significance. I believe that all the grassland tribes will pay attention to you. My request is also very simple. You have to show the power of the mercenaries. You have to beat the enemy until they can't eat or sleep when they hear your name. Do you have the confidence to complete this mission?" "Yes." Naturally, Wu Sheng and the other 3 replied in unison. "Good, I also have confidence in you. But I still want to tell you that along the way to the north, you can attack while occupying some important military positions. If necessary, you are allowed to expand your troops. I ask you to fight steadily. 200 carriages of logistics supplies won't last long for the army. You must have a safe supply route behind you. This is also the foundation of your survival. Do you understand?" Yang Qindong knew that war was about money and logistics. In modern warfare, a cannonball could cost tens of millions of dollars or even more. Even a gun could cost $1 or more. This was also why countries often negotiated with each other when they encountered problems. Unless it was absolutely necessary, they would not easily use force. But at this time, although the army did not have heavy firearms to consume, the soldiers still needed money to eat, drink, and defecate. Without sufficient rations as a foundation, it was easy for the morale of the army to become unstable and problems would arise. Fight steadily and step by step. This is what we ask of you. I will also be here waiting for the battle report of your victory." At the end of the meeting, after Yang Qindong said these words, the 3 divisions and the Nuzhen Cavalry Regiment, a total of about 10,000 people, left the first city and headed north. At this time, it was still snowing heavily outside. Logically speaking, such weather was not suitable for mobilizing troops. Even the escorting of food supplies had brought great difficulties. However, Yang Qindong did not want to wait any longer. A person's life was limited. If he wanted to achieve his life goal, he had to seize every minute. As for the heavy snow, he would have to experience it eventually. Instead of slowly adapting to it in the future, it was better to start now. "Young master, it's snowing heavily everywhere. Some places don't even have roads. It's really troublesome for the army to move." Tiger's Mane stood beside Yang Qindong on the tower of the first city. He looked at the back of the army that was gradually disappearing and said with some emotion, "Yes, it's a little troublesome. However, a truly strong army will not stop because of the bad weather. We mercenaries want to create miracles and make everything impossible possible." Yang Qindong first nodded in agreement, then said in a very heroic tone. After saying this, he looked at the surrounding generals. "Let's go. Since everyone is here, let's have a meeting to discuss the matter of attacking Talis City." Talis City was also known as Talis City. It was west of the bordered white banner of Inner Mongolia. Ming Jin Yuzi's Record of the Northern Expedition, Yongle 8th year, 1410, Zhu Di's Northern Expedition. Jin River moraine is more than 10 miles away. There is an ancient city near the road. The instructions said, "This is Talis City. I have hunted here." The southeast area of Talis City would be the future Zhangjiago. That place was already in Hebei. From there, it would be much closer to the capital of Baiming. In other words, once they occupied this place, it was equivalent to setting up a Damocles sword in the northwest of Baiming. It could fall at any time and act as a deterrent. The meeting was held in the newly built war room in the city lord's manor. In front of a huge sand table, Yang Qindong divided the work among his subordinates. "City Lord Yumian, you will remain in the city for this battle. You will be in charge of the law and order of the city. There is also the matter of the army's rations. It won't be long before the new batch of resources from Crimson City arrives. You will also need to register them. Commander Su He, this time, your Tatar cavalry will be the vanguard. I know that Amu Gulang, who is guarding Talis City, is your old friend. If possible, it would be best if you could take down the city without fighting. On the other hand, if the other side is stubborn, then don't blame us for taking action. At that time, blood will flow like rivers. You must be prepared for this. Tiger's Mane, you will lead your independent regiment and follow closely behind Commander Suhi. Once the battle starts, you can provide support at any time. Oh right, you can choose two 100mm cannons from the warehouse in the city to be used when sieging the city. Commander Lujua, you will lead the 2nd Cavalry Regiment at the back. They will be in charge of transporting the rations. At the same time, the 3 newly built regiments will be under your command. However, this time, they are not going to fight, but to build roads. In the warehouse, City Lord Yu Mian has already prepared shovels, brooms, and other items for you. He wants you to clear a slightly flat road to Talis City. The 3 new regiments are mainly responsible for protecting the safety of our rear flank. Be careful of the attacks of the Tatar cavalry on the nearby Saihan mountain. After saying this, Yang Qindong seemed to have thought of something. He looked at Yu Mian and said, when the next batch of supplies arrives, the corresponding cement factory equipment and staff will also be in place. We can't rely on Crimson City for everything, especially cement. It's too heavy and troublesome to transport. If First City wants to develop, we still need some factories. This cement factory is in the first batch of construction. We need to build it earlier. Once we can make our own cement, many roads will need to be rebuilt in the future. You have to worry about this matter. Chapter 767. Yes, 6th young master, I will remember it. Yu Mian nodded heavily. Finally, Yang Qindong's gaze fell on Zhui Feng, the leader of the 1st Cavalry Regiment. You don't have to participate in this battle. You are mainly responsible for the safety of the origin city. If there are any small people who want to make a move, it will depend on your performance. In addition, your regiment is also responsible for receiving supplies. If there is a need, there are still 7,000 captives in the logistics regiment. Although they are usually coolies, some of them used to be cavalry and can play a role on the battlefield. If there is any danger, they can be used. Is there any problem? Reporting to the 6th young master, there is no problem. But the next time there is a battle, can you not let our regiment stay at home? Zhui Feng's face had a hint of pleading. The army was mobilized and only their regiment was left. This made it very difficult for him to explain to his brothers and officers. Okay, I will agree to your request. Yang Qindong's face was full of smiles. He liked this kind of fighting spirit army. If once a battle broke out, everyone wanted to retreat and hoped that others would go to war, then this army would not be far from defeat. Speaking of attacking Tulu City, it was not a matter of 1 or 2 days of preparation. Basically, the regimental leaders knew about this news half a month ago. According to Yang Qindong, it was already the end of November. He was still preparing to celebrate the new year in the capital of Baiming, so this matter could not be delayed. Although the new year of 1453 was at the beginning of February, it was still very tense with only 2 months. Once the battle meeting started, the regimental leaders went back to make preparations. And the most excited were the 3 new regiments that had just joined the mercenary army. A regiment had 5 battalions, and a battalion had 4 companies and 400 people. A total of 6,000 soldiers of the new regiment had only trained for less than 2 months. Suddenly, a great battle was about to break out. The soldiers who wanted to contribute were all very excited. At noon, the regiment gave the order to set off early tomorrow morning. Every soldier had half a day off and could go back to accompany their families. Ba Tu left the barracks excitedly and returned to his home in the beginning city. As soon as he entered the house, he saw his mother Badama and sister Kikij waiting for him. In addition, Beta Persei, who would soon become his brother-in-law, was also there. Ba Tu, are you afraid? As soon as she saw her brother come back, Kikij hurriedly greeted him. The relationship between the brother and sister had always been very good. From this point of view, it was already confirmed. Although Mother Badama didn't say anything, her loving and caring gaze had already proved everything. Mother, sister, young, second brother, I'm not afraid. When it came to Beta Persei, Batu really wanted to call him brother-in-law, but he knew that this relationship had not been made public yet, and only a limited number of people knew about it. Besides, he didn't want his comrades to think that he had entered the army through nepotism, so it was easier for him to address Beta Persei as brother. Ha, how is it? I told you that Batu wouldn't be afraid. Beta Persei, who had been waiting for the news, suddenly laughed out loud. This laughter caused Kikij to be a little dissatisfied. She glared at Beta Persei coquettishly. Do you think everyone is like you, only excited when talking about war? This is the first time our Batu is going to the battlefield. Sigh, it's okay if it's the first time. There's always a first time for everything. Besides, the new regiment is only responsible for repairing the road at the back. There won't be any danger. This time, the sixth young master wants them to feel the atmosphere of war. Beta Persei waved his hand indifferently. He really didn't think that the new regiment was going to war, so naturally, there was nothing to worry about. At this time, Badama finally spoke. Beta Persei is right. Batu is going to feel the atmosphere of the battlefield this time. They haven't been training for long. I'm afraid that even if they want to go to the front line, the god of war won't agree. Sigh, that's right. Beta Persei chuckled. In exchange, Kikij rolled her eyes. Similar things happened in other families as well. Basically, the family members were a little worried, but these new recruits were all excited. It was as if they were really going to the battlefield and killing the enemy. Early the next morning, the army that had been preparing for more than 10 days set off. The first to attack was the 3,000-strong Tatar cavalry regiment. Commander Suhi rode a tall horse and entered the city from the south gate. Then, he passed through the streets and led the army out of the west gate under the cheers of the people. They went straight in the direction of Tulu city. After Suhi's Tatar cavalry regiment, the mercenaries walked on the streets one after another, and then went out of the city to the battlefield. This was specially requested by Yang Qindong. He wanted all the soldiers to experience such a welcome ceremony and let the people in the city feel the strength of the mercenaries. In this way, if there is a shortage of soldiers in the future, more young men will sign up to join the army. Tulu City. Originally a territory controlled by the Tatars, the general Amu Gulang, who was guarding here, also belonged to the Tatars. He was a general under Tuachuo Buhua. When translated into Chinese, Amu Gulang meant peace. In fact, as his name suggested, he had been very safe. Even when Yes Hen joined forces with Agador to attack Tuachuo Buhua not long ago, he was very safe in Tulu city. So much so that even after such a long time had passed, no one had come to cause trouble for him. All of this naturally could not be attributed to a name, but because of Tulu city's special geographical location. From here to the southeast was Baiming's territory, and it would not be too far before reaching the capital of Baiming. It could be said that this was a dividing line, completely separating Baiming from the Mongol tribes. In such an environment, it was like being roasted on a fire, and they could be attacked by the Baiming army at any time. Because of this, it was the safest place. Even Agadorji didn't have any ideas about it. Baiming was fully developing their military and opened up their commerce. It was said that they also wanted to open up a navy and build a defense line. Before they were fully prepared, they would definitely not recklessly start a war with the Mongol tribes of the Central Plains. Not to mention, the Hetao region not far from Datong was already occupied by Yeshin's Warawara. Baiming was afraid that someone would attack them from Tulu city. Who would be so blind to find trouble with them? In such an environment, Amu Gulang was very comfortable and in a good mood. When the heavy snow danced in the sky, his hanging heart was even more relieved. In such weather, no army would be willing to move. This was also the safest time of the year. However, during this period, which was regarded as the safest, there was suddenly news that the beginning city's army was moving in the direction of Tulu City. They had already passed by Saihan Mountain, and the front army was only 100 miles away. As soon as the news came out, Amu Gulang, who was resting in his residence, was shocked. He quickly called his deputy general Shibei to discuss how to deal with it. Amu Gulang was not tall and could only be said to have an ordinary figure. In comparison, Deputy General Shibei was burly and looked like a fierce general. When the two of them met and listened to the report from the scouts in the room, their expressions became grave and deep at the same time. Amu Gulang's brows were tightly knitted together. What was going on in the beginning city? The reports from the scouts had already made it very clear. For this reason, he had even sent scouts into the city to investigate. Facing the beginning city, which had opened 4 gates and looked like it was not defended at all, they did not seem to be worried about any scouts coming to inquire about the news. Therefore, the scouts went and returned quickly. A series of titles such as the Duke of Loyalty, the God of War, the Messenger of Tingri, and a series of things that had happened recently poured into Amu Gulang's ears. It was precisely because he understood more that he felt more afraid of the beginning city. Even Agar Dorji's 50,000 cavalrymen were wiped out. With the 5,000 cavalrymen and 5,000 infantrymen in the city, could they really defend the city and block the attack of the God of War's army? Amu Gulang's heart was not confident. After hesitating for a moment, he asked tentatively, General Shibei, what do you think? We can't defend it. After hesitating for a while, Shibei gave his answer. Yes, we can't defend it, but we can only defend it. I have received Great Khan Tuachuo's kindness. At this time, there's no reason for me to give up the city. If they have the ability, they can just kill me. Amu Gulang gritted his teeth and made his final decision. Seeing that the commander was determined to die, Shibei hurriedly comforted him, General, a real man knows when to yield and when to stand tall. I believe that even if the Great Khan knows, he won't blame you. It's not the same. Let's not talk about whether the Great Khan will blame me or not. If I surrender, my conscience will be uneasy for the rest of my life. A person living in this world has to hold on to something. Alright, there's no need to say any more. I've made up my mind. I will lead 5,000 cavalrymen to fight to the death with the enemy. If I unfortunately die in battle, Shibei, you and 5,000 infantrymen don't think about holding on. You can choose to surrender. This is my order. Amu Gulang's moral character was still very good. He didn't have to force his subordinates to do anything. On the contrary, he gave them a way to live. This also made Shibei very excited. General, don't worry. If you really die in battle, I will definitely collect your bones and bury you, so that you can return to the foot of Tingri. Thank you very much. Amu Gulang cupped his fist and said. 2 days later, under the city of Tulu, the vanguard of the mercenaries, the Tatar group, arrived. According to the order of Yang Qindong, He called for a fight at the foot of the city, saying that he wanted to see Amu Gulang to talk about the old days. Both of them were generals under the Tatar forces. Naturally, they knew each other before, but their relationship wasn't very deep. This time, when the two sides met, at the beginning, Amu Gulang said to Suhi with a look of contempt, "So it's General Su. Ha, I didn't expect you to still be alive. What's wrong? When your master Agadorji escaped, didn't he order you to cover the retreat? Did you defeat the mercenaries?" Chapter 768. He knew that Suhi had already surrendered to the mercenaries, yet he still dared to say such words. It was obvious that he was looking down on Suhi. But how could Suhi be so easy to deal with? He didn't care about the other party's mockery and said with a calm expression, "I am already a commander of the mercenaries. As for Agar Dorji, I have a clear conscience. I have already repaid him by exchanging my life for his son's." This was also the truth. Suhi had indeed made this request and Yang Qindong had also satisfied him. Otherwise, he would rather die in battle than surrender. Facing Su He's answer, Amu Gulang didn't comment. He seemed to know that there was no point in discussing this topic at this time. Alright, let's cut the crap. It's impossible to give up Talu City. Since the Great Khan has arranged for me to guard this place, unless I die, no one can occupy this place. Bring it on if you have the ability. After saying that, Amu Gulang waved the long sword in his hand, looking like he was about to block an army of 10,000. Facing Amu Gulang's desperate look, Su He shook her head, reined the horse and turned back. Suddenly, she led the 3,000 cavalrymen of the Tatar cavalry regiment back, leaving the 5,000 cavalrymen of the other side who had already set up the battle formation there. The mercenaries retreated just like that, leaving Amu Gulang puzzled. But the other party had already retreated, and it was a very orderly retreat. At this time, even if he rushed forward, he wouldn't be able to gain any advantage. So, he could only lead the 5,000 Tatar cavalry back to the city. Congratulations, General. Seeing Amu Gulang leading the army back to the city in one piece, the deputy general led his men to welcome him. He spoke with a happy face as soon as he saw Amu Gulang. Sigh. On the other hand, Amu Gulang didn't seem very happy. He just shook his head and said, "They won't give up on this place. There will be a big battle in the end. This time, they came just to test my thoughts. Next time, we will meet with weapons." Amu Gulang's guess was right. The reason why Su He retreated without even fighting was because he considered that the sixth young master had given him the first task of persuading the other party. Since it was obvious that he couldn't persuade them, he naturally had to send the news back first and then prepare for battle. Yang Qindong was in the rear of the army, following Tiger's Man and the independent regiment to Talis City. When the scouts at the front rushed back and reported that the generals of both sides had met but parted on bad terms, Tiger's Man immediately shouted, "Then let's fight." Do they really think that they are the best in the world just because they are guarding a broken city? If they provoke this daddy, I will blast their city gate with one shot. Let's see what they can be proud of. After obtaining the 100mm mortar, Tiger's Man's courage increased. A small Talu city with only 10,000 soldiers was really not in his eyes. Of course, shouting was one thing. Tiger's Man knew very well that in the end, it was still up to the sixth young master to make the decision. Therefore, after venting the emotions in his heart with a loud roar, he still looked at Yang Qindong with an expression of waiting for orders. "Go, do as you think." Yang Qindong nodded lightly. Although he was not a murderous person, he had never been lenient towards his opponents. "If you are not convinced, then I will beat you until you are. If you are still not convinced, then I will send you on your way." After receiving the order, Tiger's Man immediately stood at attention. "Young master, don't worry. Leave this battle to me. I will definitely not let you down." Ha ha ha. Tiger's Man had been by Yang Qindong's side since he was young. He had witnessed every scene of the young master growing from a weak scholar to a god of war. Although he did not understand why the young master changed his temperament and suddenly became so powerful and unfathomable, he still liked the current young master very much. Yang Qindong created the Yang Xie regiment, which was why Tiger's Man had the power and influence. He knew that all of this was given to him by the young master, so he was absolutely loyal to Yang Qindong. He was the kind of existence that could block a bullet and die for him at any time. The sixth young master had the most important position in his heart. Next, it would depend on his performance in the army. Although the independent regiment was in the limelight recently, there were not many opportunities to perform. Now that the opportunity had come, how could he give it up? After receiving the order, he put on a white cloak and walked out of the temporary military tent. He called the deputy commander Xian Honghai and said, "Leave 2 battalions to protect the 6th young master's safety. The rest of you, follow me, and speed up. Let's try to reach Tulu City by nightfall today." It was only a distance of 30 miles from where they were to the city. If it was summer, it would take less than 2 hours and a rapid march would be enough. But now, there was snow everywhere, and most of the roads under their feet had just been cleared. Marching in such an environment, it was naturally impossible to go fast even if they wanted to. After receiving the order, the independent regiment sped up their march, leaving 2 battalions behind to protect Yang Qindong's safety. The other 14 battalions were all rushing forward. When they saw the troops flashing past them one after another, leaving behind a trail of shadows that disappeared in front of them, Beta Persei, who was standing beside Yang Qindong, asked with some confusion, "Young master, don't we have to go with them?" "There's no need for that. Just let them do whatever they want. No matter how strong a person is, he can't rule the world. What we need to do is to wait for the good news from the front." Yang Qindong smiled with a very relieved look. This time, the number of mercenaries was not less than the other side, and they were accompanied by heavy weapons. If they still couldn't conquer the small Tulu city, it could only prove that Tiger's Man and Su He were not suitable to lead troops and could retire from active service immediately. Yang Qindong believed in Tiger's Man and Su He, and the two of them also believed in the soldiers under them. Speaking of which, during this period of time, they had not been idle in the beginning city. They only rested for 1 day every 7 days to tidy up their internal affairs and wash up. The other 6 days were spent crawling until midnight to train. Often, when the soldiers were sleeping soundly, an emergency assembly whistle would wake everyone up from their warm beds and run to the field to start training. At first, everyone did not understand this kind of training. They thought that if they did not have a good night's sleep, how could they have the energy to train? However, when every meal was filled with delicious fish and meat, they had nothing to worry about. Their nutrition could keep up, and they realized that this kind of training was not unbearable. On the contrary, everyone put in all their effort. With the idea of sweating more during training and bleeding less during battle, their strength increased day by day. When the individual strength of each soldier took a big step forward, the combat effectiveness of the entire army was a little terrifying. As the saying goes, soldiers are trained for 1,000 days to be used in a single moment. Now, it was finally time to perform well. It was finally time to fight for military merits. No one was willing to fall behind. Everyone wanted to have a better performance and fight for more advantages and benefits for their future. Yang Qindong had always been willing to spend money. In the army, there were already rules that stated how many military merits could be obtained by killing a person. Under such stimulation, everyone only hated that there was no war to fight. How could they be afraid of war? After the military order was given, the horn of war was blown. The 14 battalions of the independent regiment rushed forward, giving people the feeling that they were afraid that if they were a step slower, they would not be able to make it in time for the great battle ahead and miss out on countless military merits. Under such an excited mood, supported by such strong confidence, more than 5,000 soldiers galloped forward on horseback. Once the snow was too heavy and their path was blocked, they would dismount and walk. In short, they had to reach the designated location as soon as possible and prepare for tomorrow's battle. Under Tulu city, it slowly became lively. The number of military tents under the city also began to increase one by one. Battalions of the independent regiment arrived and set up their tents. They lined up horizontally and vertically in an extremely orderly manner. There were also some people who began to cook. Smoke rose in spirals. Everything was so orderly that Amu Gulang, who was standing on the city gate tower, shook his head. The enemy is not panicking at all. Looks like we have to give up on the idea of taking advantage of the fact that they haven't stabilized their footing yet. That's right. Look at how their tents are arranged neatly like a line. One can imagine the battle prowess of such an army. She said from the side, her eyes filled with envy. Even a general would want to lead a strong army. And the mercenaries in front of them were clearly a strong army. Right, how is the morale of the army? After giving up on the idea of sneak attacking the enemy, Amu Gulang felt much more relaxed. As for the time being, he would be safe from now until tomorrow morning. He could temporarily relax. When the issue of morale was brought up, Shibei's expression became somewhat unsightly. Not too good. When the soldiers heard that they were mercenaries from the war god's army, many of them were very afraid. Fortunately, we have always treated our brothers well. Until now, there have been no signs of desertion. But if the enemy besieges the city, it will be hard to say as time goes on. Shibei was also an extremely capable general. It was just that as the deputy general of the city, he rarely had the opportunity to display his abilities. But he usually treated his brothers very well. It was precisely because of this that when a great battle came, his subordinates were still very obedient. Even when facing the legendary war god's army, there was no one who fled without a fight. It could be said that his prestige played a significant role in all of this. But prestige might be useful in the short term. Once the battle dragged on and the enemy besieged the city, the psychological pressure would become greater and greater. It was hard to say what would happen in the end. They won't besiege the city. If I'm not wrong, I'm afraid they will choose to attack the city tomorrow. Amu Gulang understood. With such heavy snow, if they didn't have a city to rely on and just camped in the wilderness like this for a long time, no one could guarantee that there wouldn't be any problems. Since the war god was so good at fighting, there was no way he wouldn't understand this. Chapter 769. Shibi did not say anything else. He was now a fish on the chopping block. The choice had already changed. All he could do was to fight with all his might when the enemy attacked the city. As for the rest, life and death were up to fate. In Tulu City, they did not choose to launch a sneak attack. This made Tiger's Mane, who was ready to give the enemy a heavy slap in the face, a little disappointed. Looking at the firearmed soldiers lying in ambush beside the tents, he waved his hand and said, "All right, the enemy will not come out. Everyone, go into the tents to keep warm. Come, inform the 6th young master that we have safely arrived at the city and are ready to attack tomorrow morning." Under Tulu City, swords were drawn and bows were bent. It looked like a war would break out at any time. It was dark. At the rear of the army, Lu Zhua's 2nd Cavalry Regiment was also rushing to clear the road. According to Yang Qindong's intention, they wanted to open up a wide road from the first city to Tulu City. This would be beneficial for the communication between the two sides. At critical times, it would also be beneficial for the mutual support of the army. At this time, the road that the army was clearing had already reached the area controlled by Saihan Mountain. The intelligence from the reconnaissance camp had already shown that there was a Tatar army of tens of thousands of people here. Previously, they were the ones who pulled water from Alahumaki City, which was not the first city yet. Because of this, they were tricked by the mercenaries. But for some reason, since the establishment of the first city, they had not made any military movements. They seemed to be very tolerant. A dog that bites does not bark. This was an old saying among the people. When completing this mission, Yang Qindong had told Lu Zhua that they must not be careless and give the enemy a chance to attack them. Therefore, when they arrived at this area, the 2nd Cavalry Regiment's vigilance was raised a lot. The original sentries were also spread out for 2 miles to ensure that no matter if the enemy approached, they would be able to detect them early and make timely preparations. Inform the 3 new regiments that it is getting dark. Prepare to set up military tents. Inform the cooks in each battalion to prepare for dinner. Lu Zhuo rode on his warhorse and looked at the 6,000 new recruits who were waving their shovels and brooms as he gave the order. The performance of these 6,000 recruits was pretty good. At least they didn't seem to be slacking off. Speaking of which, to be able to join the army at this time, which one of them wasn't working hard? After all, there were still 7,000 captives from the battle with Agador. In terms of combat power, they were much stronger than the new recruits. If it wasn't for the issue of loyalty, where would the 6,000 new recruits come from? They were worried that once the 7,000 captives were released, they would become a mainstream force and disrupt the current management model of the mercenaries. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that each of these 6,000 people was very precious. They had made countless comparisons before they got what they wanted. Such a rare opportunity, of course, everyone wanted to grasp it well. This was also their first mission. Although they appeared as coolies, every new recruit still worked hard to perform, hoping to leave a good impression on their superiors. The sky was getting dark, and some work couldn't be done. Lu Zhuo gave the order for the new regiments to rest, but as the commander, he couldn't rest. He called his 3 battalion commanders. Ma Xiong-shan, Ding Shan, Temu, the 4 of us will have to work hard tonight. We will take turns to be on night duty. Is there a problem with each of us working for 4 hours? No problem. The 3 battalion commanders immediately patted their chests and promised. Inside the tent, a stove had already been lit. The warmth of spring here and the freezing cold outside formed an extremely obvious contrast and difference. At this time, Yang Qindong was sitting beside the stove, looking at the telegram sent from Qiqian City. Ever since the incident with Yang Taizhu and Qin Shuquan, Qiqian City had used this opportunity to conduct a large-scale investigation. The future 6th Madam, Wan Xiaoyu, was in charge. Security Bureau Chief Yang San, Inspector Bureau Chief Shin Yu, Political Department Member Mo Qingyu, and Navy 1st Division Commander Gao Xiong formed a team of 5 to cooperate. Handing such an important task to Wan Xiaoyu, it was impossible to say that Yang Qindong wasn't worried at all. After all, she was just a girl, and she was only 16 years old. A girl, and so young, could she bear such a heavy burden? But Yang Qindong still made this decision, and this was because of Wan Xiaoyu's special identity. First, she was the future 6th Madam. This meant that Wan Xiaoyu didn't have to worry too much about doing things. Even if someone wanted to deal with her, they had to consider the consequences of angering Yang Qindong. Second, as a native of Qiqian City, her parents were both factory executives. This allowed Wan Xiaoyu to have a deeper understanding of many things in Qiqian City. This was something that the other madams couldn't compare to. Thirdly, letting a little girl do this would make it easier for others to have the idea of underestimating the enemy. If this was the case, it would be equivalent to losing a round before the battle. Because at any time, underestimating the opponent could bring about irreversible consequences. Fourth, and the most important point. Ever since Wan Xiaoyu became the head of Qiqian City's publicity department, her performance in all aspects was excellent. She had already shown management skills that didn't match her age. This was also why Yang Qindong thought highly of her. Since she could manage the publicity department so well, she could probably complete the self-inspection mission beautifully. And the facts also proved that Yang Qindong's judgment of people was very accurate. Since the beginning of the operation, everything went smoothly. From the telegram sent, from the beginning of the operation until now, they had already investigated various local and military problems. There were 134 cadres, and this number was still expanding. It seemed that there was no end to it. Among these cadres, some had been arrested for corruption, some had abused their power for personal gain, and some had even used their power to abuse their power. For example, they had coerced other women to serve them, and then they would get a good job in exchange for sleeping with them, and so on. Needless to say, as a woman, Wan Xiaoyu was naturally very angry about this. As long as there was such a leader, once they fell into his hands, he wouldn't even bat an eyelid when arresting people. Sigh. Gently putting down the telegram in his hand, Yang Qindong sighed from his mouth. Qiqian City had only been established for a short period of time, and there were already so many internal problems. This was under Yang Qindong's high salary. It could be imagined that if the salary wasn't high, the number of criminals would be more than doubled. Qiqian City was only a part of an island, and that was it. One could imagine what the officials of the Great Ming Dynasty were like. The so-called, a year of honest magistrate, 100,000 snowflake silver, was probably the most appropriate description. Yang Qindong was still thinking about some related problems when the curtain of the military tent was pushed open from the outside. Beta Persei, Tai Hu, Bai Zhua, and the others walked in. Suddenly, the military tent became a lot more lively. Everyone is here, find a place to sit. Looking at these elites under his command, Yang Qindong's face showed a smile. Everyone was the first to follow Yang Qindong, so they didn't treat him as an outsider. They each found a place near the stove and sat down. Then they looked at the sixth young master with an expectant look. They knew that there must be something important to discuss, because in the past, when everyone appeared together, there would be more important tasks to carry out. Since they weren't outsiders, Yang Qindong didn't beat around the bush and directly said, "Tiger's Mane has already led the army to Tulu City. If nothing unexpected happens, there will be a good result tomorrow. Perhaps at this time tomorrow, we will be staying in the city. Taking down Tulu City in one day." If someone else said this, they might not believe it, but since it came from Yang Qindong, Tai Hu and the others had no reason to doubt it. Their sixth young master was like this. Once he said something, he would always be able to quickly fulfill it. Yang Qindong had never thought that taking down Tulu City would be difficult. The difficult part was that he would have to enter the capital of Baiming. Although he had the powerful trump card of Daikara, he shouldn't be afraid of any danger. This Daikara was very mysterious and could make him disappear into thin air, just in case. But in the end, he was still a man, not a god. What if he was caught off guard, for example, when he was sleeping at night and his head was cut off? Even if he had Daikara, he wouldn't be able to change the outcome of his death. Although Yang Qindong's perception of danger had reached a whole new level due to the existence of the qi in his heart, and it should have been very difficult for anyone to kill him. However, there was always a chance, and Yang Qindong didn't want to gamble. This was also why he had asked young heir to call Tai Hu and Bai Zuo over. After taking down Tulu City, I plan to celebrate the new year in the capital of Baiming. There are some things that have to be resolved. Now, I want you to accompany me to the capital. How about it? Are there any difficulties? Yang Qindong still looked at Tai Hu and Bai Zuo with a smile. Although he said that he was asking, he was actually informing them. Not many people knew that Yang Qindong was going to Baiming to celebrate the new year. For example, in the first city, only Yu Mian knew. Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei already knew. Therefore, when they heard this news, Tai Hu and Bai Zuo were stunned. It was precisely because they had followed Yang Qindong for a long time that they knew better than anyone else what kind of attitude Baiming had towards the sixth young master. In a sense, Yang Qindong would be the person who would overthrow the great Ming dynasty. This could already be seen from the various signs he had shown. And for such a person, there were probably many people in Baiming and southern Ming who wanted him dead. One could imagine the danger of entering Baiming at this time. As subordinates, whether it was Tai Hu or Bai Zuo, if they had a choice, they all hoped that Yang Qindong would give up on this decision. However, they knew that since the sixth young master had spoken to them so formally, he had already made his decision. What they needed to consider now was not dissuasion, but whether they could ensure the safety of the sixth young master. Chapter 770. No one knew what the current state of the Baiming imperial court was and what their attitude towards Yang Qindong was. Tai Hu and Bai Zuo could not influence those people at all. All they could do was try their best to protect the sixth young master's safety. After about 7 or 8 seconds of silence, Tai Hu and Bai Zuo stood up and gave a very standard military salute to Yang Qindong. "Sixth young master, we will do our best. Unless we die, we will not let anyone threaten your safety." "Hee, good, good. I understand what you mean." Yang Qindong's smile became wider. This was the result he wanted. As the saying goes, one must always be on guard against people. This time, he went to Baiming's capital with no intention to kill anyone. However, if someone wanted to assassinate him, then sorry, he would have to take some heads and tell the world that the murderer would be killed. The camp of the 2nd Cavalry Regiment had been built. The soldiers of the 3 new regiments had finished clearing the snow. After eating, they quickly went to rest after a day of hard work. Outside the tent, there were only some soldiers of the 2nd Regiment patrolling with torches. Everything looked so tranquil and peaceful. However, a very dangerous aura was sweeping over from the southwest direction. The Tatar cavalry on Sihon Mountain had finally decided to make a move. Mazum was the leader of the Tatar cavalry on Sihon Mountain. When Tatar was glorious, he became a member of the great Khan Tuachuo Buhua's army. He revealed his ability in constant battles and finally became the commander of tens of thousands of troops. Later, Yeshen and Agador conspired to deal with Tuachuo Buhua. Although they did not succeed in the end, the glorious Tatar army fell from prosperity to decline because of this. Mazum led his army back to Sihon Mountain. While accumulating strength, he waited for the great Khan Tuachuo Buhua's summons. However, it seemed that his luck wasn't that good. First, the team he sent to fetch water was robbed by the mercenaries, causing him to be furious. Then, he received news that Agador's 50,000 cavalrymen were defeated. This made him, who originally wanted to teach the first city a lesson, suppress the anger in his heart and wait for another opportunity. He originally thought that even if the opportunity appeared, it would have to wait until spring next year. They never thought that in this season of snow, the mercenaries would suddenly make a move. They actually wanted to attack the city of Nataru. Moreover, the scouts sent news that the front and middle of the mercenaries had already passed by the side of Sihon Mountain. Now, what appeared in front of them was the rear of the mercenaries. Nataru city was his ally and everyone listened to Tuachuo Buhua's orders. However, facing the main army of the mercenaries' main army, Mazum was not confident that he could severely injure them and force them to retreat. He could only watch them pass by him. Until the rear army arrived, he saw hope. Your mercenaries are powerful. They can even defeat the main Tatar army led by Agador. I can't afford to offend them. However, how powerful could your rear army be? Especially when the information from the scouts indicated that there were still 6,000 new recruits in this 8,000-strong mercenary army, Mazum was even more certain that his opportunity had arrived. With the same number of troops, the gap between the recruits and the veterans was very big. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that on the battlefield, in a chaotic battle, even 5 rookies might not be a match for one veteran. This was because they lacked combat experience and didn't know what to do in order to survive better and better. Therefore, under normal circumstances, no matter how many recruits there were, it was difficult for the veterans to pay attention to them. But now, there were only 2,000 veteran mercenaries and 6,000 new recruits. This gave Mazum hope. He called over his most valued general, Boris, and decided to give him 5,000 cavalrymen to launch a surprise attack on the rear of the mercenaries at the foot of the mountain and cut off their escape route. Not only would he be able to take revenge for the water, but it was also equivalent to giving his ally, Amu Gulong, another form of support. After Bila received the order, he immediately gathered 5,000 cavalry and left the city after eating an early dinner. When the sky was completely dark, he was already less than 10 li away from the rear army of the mercenaries. Damn this weather! Looking up at the sky, Bila found that snowflakes had started to fall again. He couldn't help but curse. If it was summer, he would be able to reach the front of the enemy with a few charges. Then he would charge into the enemy's camp and cut off the enemy's head. But now, in such bad weather, the heavy snow had submerged the hooves of the warhorses. How difficult would it be to charge? Pass down the order. Everyone dismount and lead the horses forward. Maintain the strength of the warhorses to the greatest extent and slowly advance forward. Helpless, Bila had no choice but to make such a decision. He threw away the warhorses that had the most advantage. This was originally a helpless matter. Giving up the advantage and engaging in close combat with the enemy. Fortunately, they couldn't ride the warhorses, and the mercenaries were the same. The heavens were very fair and gave everyone the same environment. This way, Bila was still very confident. The snow seemed to be getting heavier and heavier. It seemed like the light snow was about to turn into a heavy snow. Bora and his 5,000 cavalrymen were walking on the snowy ground. From time to time, they would hear the sound of soldiers falling into piles of snow, unable to extricate themselves and calling for help. The army moved slowly. After all, they were on the grasslands and were already used to such bad weather. Therefore, apart from being slower, they were still able to approach the rear army of the mercenaries step by step. After walking for 4 hours, they finally arrived at a place 2 li away from the camp. Due to the heavy snow, the vision of the scouts of the second group was greatly obstructed. Bila's luck wasn't bad. He was able to reach this place without being discovered. However, their luck came to an end. It was impossible for 5,000 cavalrymen to completely fool the enemy. Therefore, their appearance was still discovered by the scouts. Then, a white light suddenly soared into the sky and streaked across the top of Bila's army of 5,000. Flare! The white light instantly illuminated the entire ground and revealed the figures of the 5,000 Tatar cavalry. When the scouts saw the number of people on the other side with the help of this flare, the urgent sound of a horn resounded across the land. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! The enemy is cavalry. There are around 4,000 to 6,000 of them. After the scouts estimated the enemy's military strength based on their experience, they began to run as fast as they could, shouting and spreading the news. What is that? How can it be so bright? Could it be that the moon has fallen from the sky? The Tatar army that had been alarmed by the flares began to discuss among themselves. They had never seen or even heard of a flare before. At this moment, many of them were trembling in fear. Bila was also shocked by the flare. However, as the main commander, he knew that now wasn't the time to discuss this. How to stabilize the morale of the army and obtain victory was the most urgent matter. All soldiers listen to my order. Charge with me. The enemy only has 2,000 veterans and 6,000 recruits. We launched a surprise attack. They are no match for us. Bila used an extremely bewitching voice to speak. Then, he used his actions as an example and led his horse to charge forward. If Bila could abandon his horse and charge forward with the 5,000 Tatar soldiers, it would be possible for them to launch a surprise attack over a distance of 2 li. They might even be able to obtain victory. However, the grassland warriors trusted their horses too much. They didn't know what kind of consequences such an action would bring. The flare shot into the sky. This scene was clearly seen by the commander of the 2nd Battalion, Ding Shan, who was on night watch. His expression immediately became serious. He said to the soldiers beside him, "It's an enemy attack. Blow the whistle immediately. Everyone, gather." Beep beep beep, beep beep beep, the hurried whistle sounded and spread throughout the entire camp. Out of conditioned reflex, all the soldiers who were still sleeping when they heard the whistle immediately reacted. They got dressed and got up. They took the weapons piled in their tents and rushed out of the camp to gather their troops. The 6,000 new recruits also rushed out of their tents one by one. However, many of the soldiers were still in a sleepy state. There were even some who showed dissatisfaction. During the day, they worked hard to sweep the snow. At night, they still had to conduct an emergency training. Would they still have the strength to work during the day? The soldiers who had such thoughts were not the only one. They all had dissatisfaction on their faces. However, when they saw the commander of the 2nd Cavalry Regiment, Lu Zhua, walk in front of their troops, everyone's expression became serious. They were very clear that if they wanted to gain a foothold in the mercenary army, every performance was very important. They couldn't let the commanders see their lazy side. "Soldiers, we have encountered an enemy attack. The enemy is less than 2 miles away from us. Now, everyone, please pick up the weapons in your hands and fight together with the soldiers of the 2nd Regiment. Please remember, this is not a training exercise. This is a real battle." After giving a salute, Lu Zhua gave a few instructions to the new regiment commander. Then, he strode towards another new regiment. Wow! At this moment, the entire new regiment was like a boiling pot. They thought that it would be like the previous training. They didn't expect that everything was real. Were they going to participate in the battle? When they thought of their families and brothers and sisters who had been waiting for them to make military contributions in the beginning city, all the soldiers' eyes lit up. Ba Tu was also in this new regiment. Originally, he was also a part of the people who had complaints in his heart. However, now, he didn't have any complaints. There were only sparkling eyes and some were eager to give it a try. Chapter 771. Mother, sister, just wait for the good news of my meritorious service. Ba Tu encouraged himself in his heart and made up his mind. Then, his right hand gripped his saber even tighter. Very quickly, the recruits of the 3 regiments knew that this was not a drill, but a real battle. The 6,000 soldiers suppressed the excitement in their hearts and turned it into motivation. Each and every one of them widened their eyes and clenched their fists. They couldn't wait for the enemy to appear in front of them and let them kill to their heart's content. Recruit 1st Regiment, come with me to get your bows and arrows. Starting from the 1st Company of the 1st Battalion, come with me. The commander's voice sounded in the silent night. Squads of soldiers followed the voice and followed the shadow to the carriage behind them. They were in charge of escorting the supplies. Not only did they have all the necessities like bows and arrows, but they also had a lot of them. The 3 new regiments began to move. Lu Zhuo also walked to the side of his 3 battalion commanders. You guys go and prepare. We have already cleared a piece of the snow nearby and it's just enough for the cavalry to spread out. In a while, when the enemy is suppressed by the bows and arrows, you guys have to rush out when you hear the call to charge. Remember, the 6,000 recruits are watching you. Don't smear the reputation of our reinforced 2nd Regiment. Hearing Lu Zhuo's instructions, the 3 battalion commanders said in unison, Commander, don't worry. Just wait and see our performance. From the moment they received the news of the enemy's attack to the time they prepared for battle, Lu Zhuo and his 3 battalion commanders didn't show any signs of panic. Everything was just as Yang Qindong had said. They had to maintain a fighting spirit at all times. Only then could they face the battle calmly and without panic. The mercenary camp was ready to face the enemy. Not far away, after a quarter of an hour, Bai La finally appeared with his 5,000 cavalrymen. If they had abandoned their horses, they would have saved more than half of the time. This way, the mercenaries wouldn't have time to gather and prepare. Unfortunately, Bai La missed the golden opportunity to attack. Now that he appeared, he had already become a live target. The reinforced 2nd Cavalry Regiment didn't have any firearms and couldn't kill enemies from a distance. However, each of them had a strong bow and 50 arrows, which gave them great confidence. Bala finally appeared and saw the mercenary tents in the distance. But what puzzled him was that the surrounding area was obviously pitch black, and there wasn't even a single torch. It gave people the feeling that it was as silent as a dead camp. The scene in front of Bella gave her a bad feeling. However, since she had already rushed here, she had no choice but to release the arrow. He could even feel that there were pairs of eyes staring at him from the darkness, but he still gave the order for the entire army to charge. Everyone, abandon your horses and charge forward as infantry. It's time to defeat the mercenaries and spread the fame of our Tatar cavalry. Let's kill them together. Holding his saber high in the air and a small wooden round shield in his left hand, Bora gave the order for the army to charge. Kill! Under the command of their commander, the 5,000 Tatar soldiers roared and charged forward like a tide. In the darkness, the black color was like water, giving off a majestic and boundless aura. The mercenary tents were dark and silent. Under Lu Zhuo's command, all the torches were extinguished. After waiting for a few minutes, everyone's vision returned to normal and they could clearly see the enemies in the distance. When they saw that there were so many enemies that it was as if there was no end to them, many of the recruits began to break out in cold sweat from their foreheads, bodies, and palms. Although their usual training was based on actual combat, and in the short 2 months of recruit training, they had carried out several military exercises, but exercises were still exercises and couldn't be treated as real. This time, they were facing real enemies. If they weren't careful, they might lose their lives here. People would die in war. Everyone understood this principle. The only difference was who would be the one to die. Calm down, take a deep breath. Think of our family members who are waiting for good news. Think of the beautiful future. Look at the target, adjust your breathing, and prepare to release the arrows. Mixed in with the recruits, there were many veteran squad leaders and vice squad leaders. They felt the changes in the recruits and constantly spoke words of encouragement. Voices sounded one after another, causing the originally nervous and restless recruit camp to become much quieter. At this time, the Tatar soldiers had already rushed to a position 80 meters in front of the camp. They had already entered the range of the bows and arrows. Release the arrows. A loud shout suddenly sounded. It was the voice of the 1st Regiment leader of the recruits. The 2nd Regiment leader and the 3rd Regiment leader of the recruits responded in unison. Out of instinct, as soon as the voice fell, countless arrows broke through the air and shot towards the Tatar soldiers. Ding ding dang dang, dang dang ding ding, the sound of arrows breaking through the air, falling to the ground, and colliding with shields and weapons rang out one after another. It was very lively. A wave of 6,000 arrows was shot out and collided with the Tatar soldiers. For a moment, countless black figures fell to the ground. At least 300 people suffered different degrees of arrow injuries. The effect is not bad. Again, release the arrows. Seeing that 6,000 arrows were shot out, but only 300 of them were killed or injured. The new recruit commander couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Recruits were still recruits after all. They were still too nervous, so much so that most of them didn't perform to their full potential. Voices of encouragement rang out. Compared to before, some of the recruits had already begun to adapt. When they took out their bows from their quivers, their hands were no longer trembling like before. Their gazes had also become much calmer at this moment. Ha, did you see that? Recruits are still recruits. Even this can't hurt us. What are you afraid of? Let's kill together. Bai La was protected by a group of bodyguards. When the arrows came from afar, if it wasn't a shield in front of him, then it was a meat shield. After a wave of arrows, not only was he not injured, but even the bodyguards protecting him were not injured. This result naturally made him overjoyed. In an instant, his self-confidence exploded. He shouted loudly to encourage the soldiers below. At the same time, he increased the pace and speed of the charge. It was true that the opponents were recruits, and most of them hadn't gone to the battlefield. However, don't forget that they had trained in the mercenary camp for 2 months. Originally, they were selected from more than 10,000 young adults. Originally, they had a good foundation. In addition to the hard training, their strength had undergone a qualitative change in a very short period of time. The first wave of arrows didn't perform well because it was the first time and they were too nervous. However, when they let go of their nervousness and picked up their bows, many of the soldiers had already entered a state of mind. They had one eye open and the other closed as they aimed at the target. After adjusting their breathing, the arrows were released and flew out like meteors. Once they entered a state of mind, the advantage of the arrows began to show. Even if only 1/6 of the 6,000 soldiers hit the target, the result was still very frightening. When the arrows fell into the Tatar army, the result was that more and more soldiers were hit by the arrows and fell on the path of the charge. Good. Good shot. Seeing the enemy falling to the ground one by one and only less than 6 out of 10 were able to reach the front, the commander Luzhua laughed loudly. Come, blow the horn of charge. It's time for us to counterattack. Toot 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 toot, toot 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 toot, the loud and clear horn of charge had been blown. Along with this exciting sound, thousands of warhorses suddenly rushed out from the left and right sides of the battlefield. The warhorses galloped at high speed in the heavy snow, bringing up white snowflakes one after another. Correspondingly, there was dark red blood mixed with the white snow. The snow around the camp had already been cleared. The heavy snow had just covered the ground and it couldn't stop the warhorses from galloping wildly in this area. Under the high-speed charge of the warhorses, when the sabers fell from the sky, countless heads flew up from the ground, and countless blood splattered across the ground. The accuracy of the arrows had increased, and there was also the fierce attack of the warhorses. At this moment, the Tatar army had a feeling of being beaten silly. How did the arrows that were just for show become so accurate? Why did the frequency of the arrows become faster and faster? Why could the enemy cavalry gallop freely on the ground covered in heavy snow? Why? There were too many whys, but no one would answer them now. There were only the screams and cries of their companions for help. "General, let's retreat. We have already lost 40% of our combat strength. If we don't retreat now, I'm afraid we won't be able to retreat." Seeing more and more of his companions being killed on the ground and the number of soldiers around him decreasing, a Chiliarch ran to Bai La's side and complained tearfully. Bai La still had a trace of unwillingness. He hadn't really fought with the enemy's recruits yet. He believed that if they could engage in close combat, their advantage would be obvious. This was also the main reason why he dared to bring 5,000 soldiers to fight against the 8,000 mercenaries. However, the situation on the battlefield didn't allow him to do so. Because if the battle continued, he was afraid that it would be like what the Chiliarch said. He would have no chance of escaping. At that time, even if he severely injured the mercenaries, what could he do? Clenching his teeth, his face was filled with unwillingness. After changing his mind several times, Bai La finally gritted his teeth and gave the order, "Retreat. Retreat as you fight. If the enemy dares to charge over, counterattack with all your strength when the snow is thick." Chapter 772. The Tatar army retreated. They came like the tide and left like the ebbing tide. Seeing this, the 6,000 recruits cheered in excitement. Then, someone shouted, "Kill!" Then, the 6,000 soldiers chased after the retreating Tatar army. Due to the terrain, the 2,000 veterans of the 2nd Cavalry Regiment had limited space to move around. When they chased the enemy into deep snow, the only thing they could do was to watch the enemy escape. At the very least, they could only fire a few more arrows. However, the new soldiers who relied on their legs didn't care about this. They charged through the thick snow and rushed in front of the Tatar soldiers running behind them. They brandished their swords and hacked at them. The number of soldiers in the new regiment was too many. Perhaps they didn't have much experience in fighting, or perhaps it was their first time seeing blood. However, when 4 or 5 or even more recruits simultaneously attacked a veteran, even if the veteran's strength wasn't bad, 2 fists were no match for 4 palms. In the end, after leaving behind nearly 100 corpses, they fled in a sorry state. Withdraw the troops and return to camp. Following the military strategy of not chasing a cornered enemy, Lu Zhuo promptly ordered the overly excited recruits to stop. The snow in front of them was too thick. If they fought there, no one would be able to gain an advantage. And he wouldn't do a losing trade. The commander gave the order. Following orders was always the first lesson for the recruits. No matter how dissatisfied they were, they could only obediently retreat. Then, they counted the spoils of war and the number of enemies killed. Originally, Bai La was prepared to counterattack halfway. Seeing that his last chance was gone, he sighed and led the army back to Saihan Mountain. He had already lost 2,000 soldiers and horses. Now, he no longer had any advantage in terms of military strength. If he continued to fight, he would only be looking for trouble. In the end, it wasn't that Bai La didn't have a chance to win. If he could have abandoned his horse at the earliest moment and suddenly attacked, the 3 new regiments wouldn't have enough time to assemble. Under the chaos, they wouldn't be able to form an effective resistance. Only the heavens knew what the result would be. The failure of command made Bai La return in failure. He didn't seize the fleeting opportunity. Lu Zhuo ordered people to clean up the battlefield and count the results. At the same time, he ordered people to quickly report the results to the 6th young master at the front. In the warm tent, young Qindong, who was sitting beside the stove, already knew the news of the Tatar army on Saihan Mountain. However, he didn't care much. He was still very confident in Lu Zhua's 2nd Cavalry Regiment. As for the 3 new regiments, they might suffer some losses in this battle, but how could this not be a training exercise? It was not a bad thing to let them feel the true atmosphere of war and to let them know the cruelty of war. When Beta Persei hurriedly entered the tent and reported the results of Lu Zhua's 2nd Cavalry Regiment and explained that the Tatar army had retreated, young Qindong's face didn't show the slightest shock. It was as if all of this was expected and normal. In contrast, Beta Persei's reaction was not as calm as young Qindong's. Seeing that he didn't speak, Beta Persei said, "Young master, this Tatar army on Saihan Mountain is really wretched. We haven't even gone to find trouble with them, but they have already set their sights on us. Young master, please grant me permission. I'm willing to make a trip to the 2nd Regiment. Together with Regiment Commander Lu Zhua, we'll kill our way up Saihan Mountain and pull out this malignant tumor beside us." Young heir was a little angry. Of course, he also wanted to make a contribution. Although he was a servant of the Yang family and should be by young Qindong's side, he didn't want to miss the opportunity to perform well on the battlefield. No need. Young Qindong shook his head and said indifferently, "They won't be able to do anything. Let them stay there for now. When the time is right, we will naturally clean up these bugs." It was freezing cold outside, and it was snowing heavily. It would be extremely difficult to rush up Saihan Mountain at this moment. There was no need to spend so much effort to deal with an enemy that couldn't threaten their safety at all. In the end, Saihan Mountain was not the target of this military attack. Taking down Tulu City and opening up the passage from the first city to Baiming was the first thing to do. With young Qindong's personality, once he set a goal, he would definitely achieve it. Everything else had to give way to him. Since young Qindong said that there was no need, Beta Persei knew that it was meaningless to fight for it. He nodded and said, "Young master, Tiger Man sent a message saying that they are ready to attack the city tomorrow. Do you have any other orders?" "Just follow the plan." "I don't have any special orders." Young Qindong shook his head again. Before leaving, he had talked to Tiger Man about what to do. This person had been with him for a long time and knew best in his heart what to do. Tiger Man really knew what young Qindong was thinking. If it weren't for the special geographical location of Tulu City, with just the 10,000 Tatar army, they wouldn't be able to withstand the pressure of the army. What young Qindong wanted was a safe passage. That being the case, Tulu City must be taken down. Not only that, but the damage must not be too serious. Otherwise, how could a ruined city house the army and the people? In this world of ice and snow, even if they wanted to rebuild the city, the conditions were not enough. So after setting up the camp, Tiger Man called Su He and the other generals to express his intentions. "Tomorrow, when we attack the city, we will try to deal with the enemy outside the city. Even if we kill our way into the city, as long as they are not rebels, don't kill them easily. We have to try our best to maintain the good nature of Tulu City. What we need is a city where people can live and garrison. This is the 6th young master's intention. Does everyone understand?" When they heard that it was young Qindong's intention, the expressions of the officers, who had not taken it seriously, immediately became serious. They all nodded, indicating that they would abide by the military order and try their best not to destroy the city and not to kill indiscriminately in the city. In the camp, the 10,000 mercenaries had a good night's rest. When the sun rose the next morning, smoke rose in spirals. From afar, it looked like fog, like a paradise on earth. On the walls of Tulu City, Amu Gulang looked at all this and sighed. "What will come will come. Since that's the case, let me go out of the city and see how powerful they are." "General, be careful." Deputy General Shibi wanted to persuade him to defend the city with him, but when he thought about how cavalry could only be effective on the open ground, he suppressed the words in his heart. "It's fine. People will die eventually. For a general, dying on the battlefield is a blessing, isn't it? Laughing, Amu Gulang put on the armor that his personal guards had given him, mounted his warhorse, and led his 5,000 men out of the city. Below Tulu, both sides had already gotten into formation. From a distance, they looked neat and orderly, their warhorses standing straight. They were like two colossi standing in the middle of the world. The snow had stopped falling in the early morning. For this battle, both sides had sent out soldiers to clean up the ground to ensure that the cavalry could exert their greatest advantage. The cleared ground in the middle of the battlefield was undoubtedly going to be the final battleground for both sides. Tiger's man, Su-he, and the others were also mounted on their horses. They looked at the 5,000 Tatar cavalrymen opposite them, and an aura of death seemed to wash over them. This Amu Gulang is also an expert in commanding an army. It's a pity that such a person would become an enemy. Tiger's man looked at all this and said with emotion. Su-he understood Tiger's man's meaning and also saw that he wanted to accept this good general. Because of this, he shook his head and said, "It's useless, Tiger's man. This Amu Gulang is deeply indebted to the great Khan of Tuachuobuhua. He will never surrender. Yes, if he doesn't surrender, then he can only die." Tiger's man also knew that in the face of Su-he's persuasion, the other side had no intention of talking at all. This was enough to explain everything. If that was the case, then they would just fight. If they couldn't be friends, then they could only be enemies. At this time, Amu Gulang was also sweeping his eyes over the mercenaries opposite him. When he saw that the other side's army was also neat and orderly, and when he looked at them from afar, a wave of austere aura rushed over. He couldn't help but sigh. Mercenaries were indeed mercenaries. Just from the formation alone, many grassland cavalrymen could only achieve this much. Good formation and strong aura doesn't mean that you have powerful battle strength. Come, everyone get ready. Today we will break the myth of the invincible war god. Everyone listen to my orders, follow this general, charge. Amu Gulang was still holding a 2-meter-long sword in his hand. With a loud shout, he waved his sword forward. The warhorse under him seemed to understand his words and was the first to leave the group and charge forward. The Tatar cavalrymen moved like thunder. Under the city walls of Tulu, they formed a fan and charged towards the mercenaries. As if they knew that the mercenaries had firearms, the 5,000 Tatar cavalrymen were not too concentrated. Instead, they were very scattered. Each cavalryman maintained a distance of at least 3 meters from each other as they charged straight for the kill. The earth trembled as if it was shaking. It was like a tsunami, making it impossible for people to regain their previous calmness. Seeing the enemy cavalrymen charging over with great morale, Tiger's man raised his right hand unhurriedly and loudly ordered, "Independent Regiment, 6 firearm battalions, listen to my orders. Wait until the enemy is 600 meters away before firing. Before that, no one is allowed to move without orders. Otherwise, you will be punished by military law." They had already decided on how to deal with these 5,000 Tatar cavalrymen during last night's meeting. That was to use firearms to heavily injure the enemy. Chapter 773. Although it wasn't difficult for the Independent Regiment and the Tatar Cavalry Regiment to deal with 5,000 Tatar cavalry, Tiger's man still made the decision to use firearms to defeat the enemy. He quoted Yang Chindong's words, "Since we can pay a smaller price, there is no need to make the soldiers suffer." Su-he and Xi and Hung Hai naturally agreed with this decision. However, they weren't without worries. For example, the effective range of the Type 81 rifle was around 800 meters, and the best shooting range was between 200 to 600 meters. If the enemy was allowed to reach this distance, wouldn't the army fall into chaos? After all, if one side's morale was high and the other side didn't move, it would be a test of the people's will. If things went wrong, the army's morale might collapse. If that happened, the enemy would take advantage of the situation and kill them. The result would be unimaginable. Tiger's man only smiled at this concern. You must have confidence in our soldiers. Speaking of which, isn't this a test? If they can't even withstand this little test, then they don't deserve to be a part of the mercenary army. They can't be called elites. Tiger's man made the final decision under his insistence. Now that the enemy was getting closer and closer, whether it was Su He or Xi and Hong Hai, they all showed a trace of worry on their faces. They even observed the reactions and emotions of the surrounding soldiers more than once, afraid that some of them would be frightened by the aura and turn around to escape. The enemy was charging with full force and killing intent, but they had to stay in place and wait. This was indeed a test. Especially when the enemy was getting closer and closer, the neighing of the warhorses became clearer and clearer. Many of the warriors who were waiting on the spot revealed anxious expressions. Some of the warhorses even began to snort uneasily, lightly lifting their hooves and pacing around on the spot. Perhaps these warhorses were reminding their masters that it was time for them to charge as well. Anxiety could be seen on everyone's face. Some of the soldiers who weren't mentally strong turned pale, but fortunately, there weren't any deserters. Even though the cavalry on the other side was getting closer and closer, and the pressure was getting stronger and stronger, most of them were still staring ahead. Without any orders, they didn't even draw their cavalry swords. Tiger's mane was also paying attention to the reaction of the army. He couldn't help but smile when he saw that the soldiers' expressions had changed, but their formation was still stable. It was said that the battlefield was the best place to test and train a warrior. It seemed that this was indeed the case. Of course, Hu Mang still had a sense of propriety when doing things. He knew that going too far was bad. Seeing that the pressure on the soldiers had reached a peak, he finally gave the order. Everyone, listen up. Draw your swords. As soon as he shouted, the trumpeter beside him immediately blew a very short bugle call. This was one of the characteristics of mercenaries. Most of the time, they would use loud bugles to replace the traditional signal flags. Compared to the command flag, which they had to stare at closely, the sound of the bugle could be heard more clearly, allowing them to make the correct judgment and action immediately. Schwa! The sound of swords being drawn rang out in unison. Thousands of cavalry did the same action in unison, giving off a very imposing feeling. Just this one action instantly lifted the spirits of the soldiers who were originally in low spirits. At this moment, the Tatar cavalry on the other side was already 800 meters away, and they were still charging forward. Amu Gulang, who was charging in the middle of the troops, was flushed red with excitement. He originally thought that he would definitely lose this battle because he didn't have enough troops. In fact, he came this time with the mentality of facing death with equanimity. The only difference was that he wanted to see how many enemies he could kill in the end. However, he never thought that the mercenaries would be so careless and allow him to bring his troops closer. Could it be that the commander of the enemy didn't know that in order for the cavalry to display their strength, they had to constantly charge and increase their speed, relying on the advantage of speed to increase the power of their swords? Amu Gulang cursed the idiocy of the enemy commander in his heart. He became more and more excited as he saw the hope of victory. He believed that as long as he charged forward, once he entered the camp of the mercenaries, even if the enemy had guns, they wouldn't be able to do anything to him. Perhaps he would really become the first grassland army to defeat the mercenaries. Amu Gulang was very happy, and the cavalry following him were also very excited. They urged their horses to charge forward with all their might, increasing their speed to the maximum. They wanted to charge into the camp of the unprepared mercenaries, and then inflict heavy damage to them to obtain the final victory. Their speed was increased to the maximum, and the distance of 200 meters was covered in a flash. When the distance between the two sides reached 600 meters, Tiger's man's eyes narrowed, and he loudly gave the order to open fire. The sound of the bugle call to open fire broke the silence of the battlefield once again. The 6 battalions of independent soldiers holding the Type 81 rifles rode on their horses, holding their guns. They had already adjusted their breathing, and even aimed at the enemy. Their right index finger moved, and the scene of 10,000 guns being fired at the same time appeared. Bang 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 bang, the sound of gunfire was loud, and the golden bullets flew toward the Tatar cavalry. Both sides collided on their respective paths, causing flowers to bloom and blood to splatter. When the bullets entered the human body, under the powerful force, some of the bullets directly sank into the human body, causing damage to the tissues. Some of the bullets simply rushed out and entered the body of the second cavalryman behind, causing continuous damage. The sudden sound of gunfire had already made Amu Gulang cry out in his heart. However, he didn't know much about the new continuous fire guns, so he thought that the mercenaries opposite him were like the Great Ming Dynasty's Divine Arms Battalion, and that their guns could only shoot up to 100 meters away. The reason why the enemy opened fire now was just to create a kind of momentum and put a huge psychological pressure on his soldiers. It was precisely because he didn't think much of it that when he heard the gunfire, Amu Gulang immediately shouted to the cavalrymen beside him, "Everyone, don't panic. Their guns can't shoot that far. They are just trying to scare." Ugh! Before he could finish his sentence, or rather, he was only halfway through when the scene in front of him shocked him. He realized that many of his soldiers had fallen off their horses at this moment. Although some of them didn't fall off their horses, their bodies were already covered in blood, and more blood was flowing out. In the end, they lay on their horses, fainting from excessive blood loss or dying from blood loss. Open fire. Tiger's man was relieved when he saw that the first wave of enemies from afar had suffered countless casualties. At this time, if he led the army to counterattack, victory was already in his grasp. However, since he still had cannons in his hands, he naturally had to make good use of them. The sixth young master had said that wasting resources was an extremely shameful thing. A new military order was issued, and the loud bugle sounded again. The two 100mm sniper cannons at the rear that could shoot thousands of meters away were immediately loaded with shells. 2 seconds later, they flew out of the barrels and landed at the coordinates that had been adjusted long ago. Boom! Boom! Two deafening sounds that could even shatter one's eardrums rang out and landed in the central area of the Tatar cavalrymen. Caught off guard, the cavalrymen in that area were blown off their horses, and they were dizzy from the bombardment. Especially at the place where the shells landed, a few unlucky cavalrymen didn't even have a corpse left. It was as if they had suddenly disappeared from the world. If the gunshots were just an appetizer that greatly hindered the Tatar cavalrymen's forward momentum, then the sudden appearance of the artillery was like a hammer that heavily smashed people's hearts, causing an unprecedented panic. Blow the bugle call, charge! Seeing that the enemy's formation was in chaos, and many cavalrymen were even circling around in place, not knowing where was safe, Tiger's man knew that the opportunity to launch the attack had come. Immediately, he shouted loudly. When the loud bugle call resounded in front of the vast land, countless mercenary cavalrymen began to charge forward. They shouted loudly and released the unhappiness in their hearts just now. They waved their sabers and directly rushed towards the Tatar cavalrymen's formation that was already in chaos. At the rear of the Tatar cavalrymen, the two cannons extended in the direction of attack, and the two shells landed here, making the cavalrymen who were walking at the back feel the threat. The two cannons caused at least 100 casualties. The Tatar cavalrymen had never seen such powerful weapons before, so they scattered and fled. They didn't dare to gather together and slowly advance like before. The rear army was in chaos, and the middle army was also in chaos. This bad sign started to spread to the entire battlefield. Without the support of the middle army and the rear army, Amu Gulang, who was in the front army, seemed to have become a lone army. Looking at the less than 500 cavalrymen around him and the countless mercenary cavalrymen rushing toward him, he was like a fugitive who had walked into a dead end. There was no door to heaven. "General, what should we do?" Seeing that the middle of the army and the front of the army had already lost contact, a guard beside Amu Gulang anxiously asked. At this moment, Amu Gulang's face revealed a firm expression. He gritted his teeth and made the final decision of his life. Kill with me, fight with them. At this time, Amu Gulang made the decision to repay the kindness with his life. Based on the care that the Great Khan had given him in the past, he couldn't choose to surrender to the mercenaries like the others. Since that was the case, he could only fight with his life on the line. Chapter 774. Kill. After making his decision, Amu Gulang was the first to whip his horse and charge towards the countless mercenaries. Beside him, the 500 Tatar cavalrymen seemed to have been influenced by him and charged forward with a loud roar. "General Su He, I'll leave this place to your Tatar cavalry. Soldiers of the independent regiment, follow me and charge from both sides." Tiger's Mane saw through Amu Gulang's intentions with a single glance. Since the other party wanted to die for a righteous cause, then he would fulfill his wish. How could Tiger's Mane pay too much attention to an enemy general who wouldn't surrender? After shouting at Su He, he and Vice Commander Xi and Hung Hai led their troops from the left and right, leaping over Amu Gulang's 500 cavalrymen and charging forward. Amu Gulang also didn't have any thoughts of stopping Tiger's Mane. He had already seen Su He coming from the front and knew that this was his opponent. He immediately brandished his long sword and charged forward. Both sides didn't have any intention of retreating. Like two high-speed mad bulls, they collided with each other in the next moment. Then the cavalrymen intertwined with each other and the sound of weapons clashing could be heard. Clanking sounds could be heard as the cavalrymen fell from their horses one after another and died on the battlefield. After a charge, when both sides turned their horses around, they saw the corpses of more than 200 cavalrymen on the battlefield. 90% of these corpses belonged to Amu Gulang's men. 500 against 3,000, there was a great disparity in military strength. In addition, the sabers in the hands of the Tatar cavalry were very sharp. Once Amu Gulang's men clashed with them, the sabers would often break after 5 or 6 strikes. At that time, they would only be at the mercy of the enemy. In just one clash, they had lost more than 200 soldiers. Nearly half of their forces had been lost. Aghast could be seen in Amu Gulang's eyes. But then his face turned red and he shouted again, "Follow me and kill." The second clash began. Sabers were waved, shouting, and warhorses neighed. There were 3,000 people on one side and 200 on the other. Once again, they clashed. Amu Gulang brandished his 3-meter-long blade, continuously slashing about. He had exchanged blows with at least 7 mercenaries, killing 2 of them on their horses. However, he was also tired to the point where he was gasping for breath. When he turned around to look at his horse again, he saw another 200 or so corpses on the battlefield. Most of them were still his subordinates. "General, I'm afraid we can't hold on any longer." It was still the same bodyguard. He seemed to be quite lucky to have held on until now. However, the others were not so lucky. There were originally 500 cavalrymen, but now there were only about 50 left. Not only that, but most of them were also injured. Even without the soldiers' reminder, Amu Gulang could see that the situation was very unfavorable. However, for Amu Gulang, who had long been prepared to die, this was just a matter of asking for mercy. "How many of them did we kill?" "You've seen it clearly." Although he knew that he was about to die, Agu Gulang was still concerned about the number of enemies he had killed. Perhaps this was the reason why he insisted on fighting to the death. Even if he died, he would drag some of them down with him. This, maybe less than 30 people. The soldier's eyesight was not bad, but because of this, he saw a little too clearly and said some hurtful words. "Less than 30 people." Hearing this answer, Amu Gulang's face flashed with a very awkward expression. Of course, this was because his military strength was not as good as the enemy's. However, more than 400 people died, and less than 30 of the enemy's men were killed. This result was still unacceptable to him. He was very sad. Could it be that this was the price he had to pay in exchange for his blood? Were the mercenaries really so powerful? Amu Gulang could be considered a general. At least, his will to fight to the death was not something that some people could compare to. The Tatar cavalry he led could also be considered to be good at fighting. However, when faced with the valiant mercenaries, they were at an absolute disadvantage in terms of numbers and weapons. The outcome of this battle was already set in stone. Su He originally had the talent of a general. Otherwise, Yang Qindong would not have spent so much effort to recruit him. In addition, the Tatar cavalry he led were the most elite forces in Aga Dorji's hands. Recently, they were equipped with the new sabers. It could be said that they were like a tiger that had grown wings. Moreover, during this period of time, they ate well, and the intensity of their training was several times stronger than before. Their strength was also many times stronger than before. Under such conditions, how could they be defeated? Even if nearly 30 people were killed or injured, this was because Amu Gulang and his soldiers were good at martial arts. Otherwise, the price of nearly 30 people would not have been paid. Amu Gulang's heart was sad, but he did not have time to think too much. On the opposite side, Su He had once again led the army to kill them. As if he knew that Amu Gulang was not willing to die, he did not even have the intention to persuade him. Kill. Although there were only 50 brothers left, Amu Gulang still did not have the intention to retreat. After a loud shout, he once again waved the 3-meter-long saber and rushed forward. This time, his target was Su He. Generals against generals, this was a kind of challenge, but also a kind of determination. It showed that Amu Gulang had given up on the road of survival and was determined to severely injure Su He before he died. After all, Su He was Aga Dorji's most trusted general. His status was far higher than Amu Gulang's. Even in terms of personal strength, Su He was much stronger than Amu Dorji. He knew that the opponent was stronger, but he still wanted to challenge. This kind of courage had already explained everything. Leave this person to me. You guys go and deal with the others. Su He also saw Amu Gulang's determination to fight to the death. He immediately decided to help him. He glanced at Gu Shan and the others who were protecting him. Gu Shan and the others had to obey the general's order. After a sound of agreement, they rushed to the other enemies. For a time, the battlefield became a vacuum. Su He stood with his saber, waiting for Amu Gulang to approach. In the distance, a man and a horse were approaching quickly. The 3-meter-long broadsword had already been raised. When they were 3 meters away from Su He, the broadsword fell from the air and pressed down with the whistling sound of the wind. Clenching the saber in his right hand, Su He stared at Amu Gulang's every move. When the saber fell, he moved sideways and raised his saber to cut it. Under the powerful arm, the collision of the two weapons caused a spark. Under the huge force, the saber was indeed crooked. Under the collision of the saber, it almost fell out of his hand. Forcibly holding the 3-meter-long saber, Amu Gulang's face showed a shocked expression. He had long heard that Su He was an all-rounder. Before, he didn't take it seriously. It wasn't until he really fought with him that he realized that a famous general was indeed a famous general. Sure enough, he wasn't so easy to deal with. The saber fell and also narrowed the distance between the two sides. At this moment, the advantage of the saber was revealed. As the saying goes, an inch shorter is an inch more dangerous. At close range, the horse-chopping blade that was only a meter long was able to fully display its agility. Under the incessant chopping from top to bottom, it caused Amu Gulang's mind to be thrown into disarray. Numerous wounds appeared on his body. If it was someone else who was cut by the sharp saber, they would have fallen off the horse and been defeated. But Amu Gulang was determined to die. He was completely relying on his spirit to make a final resistance. He had already ignored the wounds on his body. He thought that if he could kill Su He, even if he died, it would be worth it. In Su He's eyes, Amu Gulang's unwillingness to fight to the death made him reveal a look of admiration. But this was a battlefield, not making friends. Although he was shocked by the opponent's determination to fight to the death, Suhi's hands didn't stop. Not only did he wave the saber forward, he also found an opportunity to grab the back of the saber and held it in his hand. If it was under normal circumstances, if Suhi dared to be so arrogant, Amu Gulang only needed to use all his strength to regain control of the weapon. It was not impossible for him to take the opportunity to seriously injure Suhi. But now, he was already covered in scars. His strength was almost exhausted. Facing Suhi's huge strength, he was already powerless to resist. With his saber restrained, Amu Gulang could only passively take the beating. After instinctively dodging 2 sabers, the saber fell on his chest for the 3rd time, penetrating his chest. While blood flowed out, the vitality in Amu Gulang's eyes quickly disappeared. With a saber in his chest, Amu Gulang's strength was also exhausted at this moment. He glanced at Suhi, who was riding on the horse next to him. He wanted to say something, but his mouth couldn't make any sound except for blood foam. With a plop, Suhi's left hand loosened the saber, and Amu Gulang fell from the horse. Even if he died in battle, at that moment, he still opened his eyes wide and looked at the sky. It seemed that he still wanted to say, "Great Khan, I didn't let you down. I fought until the last drop of blood." Amu Gulang died in battle. The last 50 cavalrymen left by his side also died under the siege of Gushan and the others. But it was worth mentioning that no matter how Gushan tempted them with words, none of the 50 men surrendered. In the end, they fought until the last drop of blood was shed and died. The attack of the independent regiment led by Tiger's man was also very smooth. First, they launched a surprise attack with the muskets, which destroyed the enemy's morale and killed nearly 1,000 cavalrymen. Then, the mortars showed their prowess. The chaotic bombardment disrupted the enemy's formation and dealt them a heavy psychological blow. When the independent regiment came, it was like the last straw that broke the camel's back. The Tatar cavalrymen, whose morale had fallen to the bottom, became a turtle in a jar, a fish in a net. Those who surrender can live, those who resist will be killed. Tiger's man shouted, and the soldiers of the independent regiment also shouted. During this period, as long as there was resistance, they would swarm up together. Several sabers would come at the same time. No Tatar cavalryman could withstand such power. There was no other choice but to die. Chapter 775. I surrender. Seeing that the general situation was about to change, not even knowing whether the main general Amu Gulang was alive or dead, facing the impressive momentum of the independent regiment, the Tatar cavalry finally threw down the weapons in their hands, jumped off their warhorses, and knelt on the ground. Under the pressure, more and more people chose to surrender. They weren't like Amu Gulang, who had received favors from the Great Khan. They joined the army just to make a living. Besides, didn't they see that there were also Tatar cavalry among the mercenaries? Didn't they also surrender? Since there was a precedent, when it came to surrendering, no one seemed to be so resistant. Of the 5,000 Tatar cavalry, 2,000 were killed, and 3,000 surrendered. Tiger's man Suhi's troops only lost less than 150 people, not even a tenth of the enemy's. This was definitely a great victory. Come, take the captives away. Watch them carefully, but don't abuse them. Everyone else, push the cannons up and prepare to attack the city. After dealing with the 5,000 enemy cavalry, Tiger's man's gaze fell on the city of Tulu. He had given the young master a military order yesterday, saying that he would definitely take down the city today. He couldn't go back on his word. For others, it was undoubtedly difficult to take down a city in one day, or even impossible. However, for Tiger's man who had cannons and muskets, this was nothing. Below the city walls of Tulu, Shibi saw everything that happened below. Especially when he saw Amu Gulang die on the battlefield, his eyes quickly became moist. Speaking of which, Shibi was a chess piece that the Great Khan had placed beside Amu Gulang to monitor him. In other words, from a certain point of view, they weren't trusted. It was just that he could see that Amu Gulang didn't want to believe it. In the end, it was the so-called art of balance, which was why the relationship between the two wasn't very good. But no matter what, they had worked together for a while. Seeing Amu Gulang die in front of him, he more or less felt sad. General Amu Gulang, with your death, my mission is complete. Next, I will do my best to defend the city, but he didn't continue, because he had already made up his mind. But he still wanted to see the true strength of the mercenaries. He looked at the Tatar soldiers on the city walls and shouted, "Everyone, prepare your bows and arrows. Once the enemy gets close to the city, shoot them back." Using bows and arrows to defend a city was the most commonly used method of defending a city. If it was summer, they would also get some kerosene and catapults, which would greatly increase their defensive capabilities. The archery ability of the Tatar soldiers was still very strong. At the very least, their accuracy was much higher than the Ming Dynasty army. This was related to the environment they grew up in. Horses and bows were always indispensable. However, when facing mercenaries with firearms, everything was a different story. Send someone to tell them to open the city and surrender. Then, we won't hurt the soldiers and civilians in the city. Otherwise, don't blame us for being rude. Tiger's Mane looked at the Tatar soldiers on the city walls with a pair of binoculars, and said with a snort of contempt, "I'll do it." Vice Commander Xian Honghai took the initiative to accept the task. He took a self-made iron horn and rode out alone. When he was 150 meters away from the city walls, he suddenly stopped, and then his loud voice had a chance to show off. "Soldiers on the city walls, listen up." As Xian Honghai shouted, the expressions of the Tatar soldiers on the city walls changed again and again. At this time, many of them couldn't help but look at General Shibi. Obviously, they all knew that if General Amu Gulang's 5,000 cavalrymen were defeated, their 5,000 infantrymen without war horses would not be able to resist at all. If they continued to fight, they would die. If they surrendered, they might find a way to survive. How could Shibi not see the thoughts of the soldiers on the city walls? But if he didn't even fight, he would be letting down the dead Amu Gulang. So he said loudly, "Brothers, I know what you're thinking. But after all, this is a siege, not a cavalry charge. I think we still have the strength to defend the city. If we can't win, it's not too late to surrender. I think you all still like the feeling of freedom." Shibi's understanding of the people's hearts was immediately met with a wave of support from the soldiers. At this moment, the Tatar soldiers standing on the battlements stared at the mercenaries on the city walls. It was as if they were saying, "If you want to come, we'll serve you with bows and arrows." Xian Honghai shouted a few times but didn't hear any response. He patted his horse and returned to Tiger's Mane's side. He spread out his hands and said, "Tiger's Mane, they won't surrender." "Ha, if they don't surrender, then we'll make them surrender. Men, prepare the cannons. Musketeers, go forward and fire 200 meters away. The rest of the cavalry, get ready to charge with me." Tiger's Mane said with a face full of confidence. With his muskets and cannons, he really didn't put Tulu's city in his eyes. The city walls were quickly prepared. 6 battalions, totaling more than 2,000 gunmen, slowly advanced. They stopped 200 meters away from Tulu's city. Then, they lined up in a straight line and aimed at the city wall. On the city gate tower, between the battlements, Shibi was leading thousands of Tatar soldiers to look down. Originally, they had prepared their bows and arrows to give the enemy a head-on blow. But when they saw the enemy stop 200 meters away, they all looked down curiously. They didn't know what the mercenaries were going to do next. They couldn't be blamed. Their understanding of muskets was completely based on the impression the Ming dynasty gave them. At that time, muskets could only fire up to a distance of 100 meters. It wasn't much different from bows and arrows. The only difference was that it seemed to be more lethal. During the battle with the Ming dynasty, because of the distance, they couldn't see clearly how Amu Gelang's cavalry was hit. The Tatar soldiers still had a confused expression. The 6 battalions of mercenaries didn't hold back. Most of them were auxiliary soldiers. Some of them even had the qualifications to take the cold front test. During this period of training, their strength had reached a new level. Now that they were facing an enemy close by, they were already full of fighting spirit. All they lacked was the order to open fire. Now, the order was finally given. Tiger's Mane raised his right arm and lowered it. The trumpeter beside him blew the bugle horn for permission to open fire. Immediately, the sound of gunfire rang out. Countless bullets flew towards the Tatar soldiers on Toulouse city as if they had eyes. The Tatar soldiers who didn't have the slightest bit of mental preparation and didn't take the musketeers seriously suffered a great loss. A second after the sound of gunfire rang out, a bloody scene appeared on the city tower. At least a few hundred soldiers were shot in the vitals because they didn't take any precautions. Only a few lucky ones managed to escape with their lives because the bullets missed and hit the battlements. Quick, squat down. Don't stick your heads out. The moment the gunfire rang out, Bear instinctively lowered his head and leaned against the battlements. Because of this, he managed to avoid a disaster. But when he saw that many soldiers were hit by the muskets because they didn't dodge and fell to the ground with their heads tilted to the side, he couldn't help but shout out loud. Facts speak louder than words. There was no need for Bear to shout. All the soldiers looked for a place to hide with a frightened expression. They were very surprised. What kind of musket was this? Not only could it hit so far, but it was also so accurate. In the face of such a weapon, who would dare to stick their head out and shoot? What was the difference between that and seeking death? Like the other soldiers, Bear's face also showed a frightened expression. He was a general, but he also only had one life. If he was hit by a bullet, he wouldn't be any better. All the Tatar soldiers found a safe place to hide, so they couldn't pose a threat to the mercenaries below the city. It was at this moment that the city tower seemed to tremble. The mortars had begun to show their might. After accurately aiming at the target, the 2 mortars fired simultaneously. One of the mortars hit the city gate of Talis city. After a loud bang, the seemingly heavy city gate was completely blown apart. Along with the city gate were dozens of Tatar soldiers who were holding huge logs against the city gate. Their task was to guard the city gate. The enemy was cavalry, so they shouldn't be good at sieges. With one side defending and one side attacking, the situation should be in their favor. They didn't expect that the mercenaries wouldn't be polite at all. With just a blast from the 2 cannons, the city gate was blown apart. They didn't even have the slightest intention of drawing out the distance. When the city gate was opened, the vice-commander Xian Honghai on horseback roared and took the lead to charge into Toulouse city. Behind him were 5 battalions of 2,000 independent soldiers. Xian Honghai launched an all-out charge. The commander of the Tatar cavalry regiment, Su He, also didn't want to be outdone. With a shout, he also led his troops to follow. While charging, he suppressed the shock in his heart. Heavens! The power of the mercenaries' cannons was too great. With such heavy weapons, what kind of city couldn't they take down? What kind of enemy could stop them? The general on the city tower was even more shocked. From the tremor, he could feel that the mercenaries should have opened the city gate. Now that he heard the sound of iron hooves, he was afraid that they were now rushing into the city. Once they entered the city, with the advantage of cavalry over infantry, how could he resist? At this moment, he suddenly felt powerless. He knew that Toulouse city had changed hands. Chapter 776. General, the cavalry used the cannons to blast open the city gates. They are now charging into the city. Our soldiers can't stop them at all. A Chiliarch frantically crawled over to Shibi, who was still hiding behind a battlement, and spoke with an urgent expression. Can't stop them, Shibi seemed to be talking to himself. Yes, we can't stop them. Many of the soldiers below the city had already surrendered. Actually, we can't blame them. The difference in strength between the two sides is too great. Plus, our brothers haven't had a full meal for a long time. We even killed more than half of our warhorses. We don't have enough strength to continue fighting with them. The Chiliarch explained to the soldiers below. After Tuachuo Buhua was ambushed by Yeshen and his brother Agar Dorj, he retreated under the protection of his loyal general. From that moment on, the 10,000 Tatar soldiers guarding the city of Tulu no longer had any supplies. As a rootless tree, in order to save themselves, they first launched an attack on the northern Ming territory by raiding grain and grass. However, not only did they not manage to steal much, they were also surrounded by the cavalry sent out by the northern Ming's Wanquan department. If it weren't for the Tatar cavalry's bravery, they would have suffered a great loss. Since Bai Ming's side didn't gain any benefits, they could only target the grasslands and rob some of the herdsmen. However, this kind of behavior quickly forced the people of the grassland nearby to flee even further away. When the food in the city became less and less, Amu Gulang had no choice but to order the slaughter of the horses. This was also the reason why there were 10,000 Tatar soldiers but only 5,000 cavalry. Half of the missing horses were eaten by the Tatar soldiers themselves. They knew their own situation best. If the mercenaries were ordinary, the Tatar soldiers might be able to muster up the courage to fight and maybe even steal some food from them. But now, facing the mercenaries who were clearly stronger than them, they would die if they continued to resist. Knowing this, it wasn't a big deal that some soldiers chose to surrender. Since the soldiers below the city have surrendered, let's surrender too. Tell the brothers to stop resisting and surrender. Shibi let out a long sigh as if he had made a very difficult decision. After saying these words, his whole body relaxed. It was as if from this moment on, he had put down a heavy burden on his body. White flags were suddenly hung on the city walls of Tulu City. Under the sunlight, they looked pale and powerless. When Tiger's Mane saw this scene, he laughed loudly. Ha! The Tatar soldiers have surrendered. Enter the city. The mercenaries entered the city more than 2 hours earlier than planned. Tiger's Mane's original plan didn't fully unfolded. This made him full of disdain for the 5,000 Tatar soldiers guarding the city. The way he saw it, even with the advantage of the city, the resistance was so weak. The general guarding the city was too incompetent. However, all of this changed because of what he saw after entering the city. When Tiger's Mane entered the city, Su He and Xi and Hong Hai had already completely controlled the situation here. Even Shibi and the others were brought down from the city tower. They knelt on the ground and waited for Tiger's Mane to inspect. Riding a tall horse into the city, Tiger's Mane originally wanted to ridicule the enemy's general and suppress the enemy's morale. But when his eyes fell on Shibi and the soldiers beside him, he was surprised to find that they didn't look like an army. They didn't look like the valiant and mighty grassland warriors at all. Each of them looked sallow and emaciated. Their clothes looked so big on their bodies. They looked like children wearing an adult's robe. It was so inappropriate. Of course, the Tatar soldiers weren't so poor that they didn't even have clothes to wear. The reason for this was because they were malnourished for a long time. They didn't have enough food to fill their stomachs. As a result, each of them had lost a few kilograms or more. This made them look so out of place with the clothes they were wearing. Tiger's Mane rode on his horse. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. Commander Su He seemed to understand something. He rode his horse to his side and said, Tiger's Mane, I've already asked around. These soldiers haven't eaten for a long time. They even used their horses to fill their stomachs. Speaking of this, Su He couldn't bear to see her like this. For the grassland warriors, the warhorses were their brothers. Most of the time, the horses would be there if the men were still alive, and if the men were dead, the horses would also die. If they were to use their brothers as food, one could imagine how bad the environment would be. Not to mention, horse meat was sour and didn't taste very good. If it wasn't for the fact that they had no other choice, who would make such a decision? This. Sigh. Arrange for the food to be cooked immediately. At least let them eat their fill first. Tiger's mane suppressed all the words he wanted to say. He finally understood why the Tatar soldiers, who always looked powerful, were so useless today. Presumably, without food, even if they were mercenaries, how much of their strength could they display? He thanked Tiger's mane on behalf of these soldiers. Hearing Tiger's mane's order, He sighed. No matter what, he was still a Tatar. He was connected to these people by blood. Of course, he didn't want to see his own people in such a pitiful state. Seeing He's touched expression, Tiger's mane chuckled. Okay, go and pass down my order. Oh right, the commoners should be starving. Pass down the order to make a portion for them. Try to let everyone eat their fill. Yes. He once again cupped his fists and thanked him. Then, as if he remembered something, he quickly saluted again and quickly rode away. Warm tears flowed out from the corners of his eyes. This time, he was really touched by Tiger's mane's actions. The news of the victory reached Yang Qindong, who was slowly moving. Looking at the battle report, Tiger's mane took down the entire Toulouse city at the cost of less than 200 casualties and captured nearly 8,000 enemy soldiers. Yang Qindong laughed. Not bad, Tiger's mane did a good job. It looks like he has the talent to be a general. Seeing that Yang Qindong was in a good mood, Beta Persei quickly flattered him. That's right, Tiger's mane is actually very capable of leading an army. After all, he has been by the young master's side for so long. Of course, there was another subtext to this sentence, which was that he had been by the young master's side for a long time and was also a talented commander. Naturally, Beta Persei wouldn't say these words out loud. He didn't forget the choice Yang Qindong gave him. He could either go down and be a regiment commander and lead an army, or he could obediently stay by his side. At that time, he chose the latter without hesitation. Towards Yang Qindong, besides admiration, Beta Persei also felt gratitude. Because without this master, he might not even know where he would be right now, or whether he was alive or dead. It was precisely because of the sixth young master that he was able to bring him such wonderful things. Now that he was about to have a woman, the gratitude in his heart grew even stronger. He would never leave Yang Qindong's side, but if there was a chance to lead an army to the battlefield, he would also yearn for it. After all, men had such primitive impulses in their bones. Yang Qindong chuckled and didn't make any comments on Beta Persei's words. Instead, he waved his hand and said, if that's the case, speed up the march. We'll rest in Toulouse city today. The distance wasn't very far to begin with. In the afternoon, Yang Qindong and more than 1,000 people arrived at the foot of the city and entered the city together with Tiger's mane and the others who were waiting there. Along the way, Tiger's mane also gave a simple report on the battle that had happened. Previously, the scout had already reported the situation to Yang Qindong. Now, he just had to repeat it. Tiger's mane spoke very quickly. After he finished talking about the battle, his expression became a little depressed. Young master, the people here don't have it easy. Hearing Tiger's mane say that the Tatar soldiers guarding the city didn't have it easy, Yang Qindong's face revealed a very strange expression. Why did he suddenly speak up for the other party? Young master, the situation is like this. With a serious face, Hu Mang recounted everything he had seen after entering the city, as well as everything he had learned about the situation. When he said that the Tatar soldiers in the city hadn't eaten a full meal for a long time, and that they had to kill war horses to satisfy their hunger, and that some of the people in the city had to trade their children for food in order to survive, Tiger's mane clenched his teeth and clenched his right hand tightly. He had a very pained expression on his face. Yang Qindong's face darkened when he heard the words trade their children for food. Of course, he knew what this meant. Although he had been in this world for a few years and had seen many poor people, when he heard these words, he was still very moved. In his mind, he could even imagine what kind of situation the people had to be in to do such a thing. It must be quite a lot of helplessness, right? Presumably, the parents who did this would feel guilty for the rest of their lives, right? Young master, I have already given the order to take out our rations and let the surrendered soldiers and the people have a full meal first. Please don't punish us. Tiger's Mane's voice sounded again, but when he said this, he already looked like he was asking for forgiveness. Speaking of which, it was reasonable to distribute the military rations to the surrendered soldiers. After all, these people might become his comrades in the future. However, distributing the rations to the people, even some women, children, and the elderly, was not something that Tiger's Mane could casually decide. Most of these people didn't have the strength to truss a chicken, so even if they had it in their hands, it wouldn't be very useful. Although the mercenaries already had 2,000 mu of greenhouses in the first city, which could solve a part of the food problem, most of the food still had to be transported by sea from Red Nest City. The manpower and material resources required were too large. Now that the military rations were distributed like this, Tiger's Mane should ask for forgiveness. Chapter 777. Hey, what crime have you committed? Yang Qindong casually waved his hand. Although we don't have the ability to let all the people in the world live a good life and eat their fill, as long as we are willing to work hard, this problem will eventually be solved. What you did was not wrong. Thank you, young master. Tiger's Mane also knew that since he had been by Yang Qindong's side for so long, he could still make this decision. Even if he was wrong, he would not be punished too much. However, he also had to show the appropriate attitude, because from a certain point of view, he was a servant, and Yang Qindong was the master. Yes, not only did you not do anything wrong, but you also contributed greatly to being able to take down Tulu City at such a small price. Actually, with the current strength of the independent regiment, you already have the conditions to become a division. How about this? I will now order you to be the division commander of the independent regiment. Later, I will send a telegram to the military and political department of Qiqian City to let them organize the records. You should also put in some effort and report the names of the officers under you to them. Yang Qindong said with a chuckle. Tiger's Mane was his study companion. He had been following her since she was young, so she was very familiar with his temperament. Since he had such ability to command the army, of course he would do his best to promote him. Of course, he was the only one who knew if he had any other motives for doing this. Being promoted all of a sudden, Hu Mang was still in a daze. Beta Persei, who was at the side, had already come over with a smile on his face. Division Commander Tiger, congratulations. Remember to treat us to a meal later, he. Tiger's Mane only came to his senses after hearing this. While staring at Beta Persei, he also saluted Yang Qindong. Young master, I am someone by your side. This independent regiment is only a temporary proxy. I have no intention of leaving your side, young master. Tiger's Mane was not thinking about the position of a division commander. With his status, who would dare to treat him like that even though he was the captain? Even Commander Wu Sheng and Political Commissar Chen Bo of the 3rd Division of the Cold Front Division would respectfully address themselves as his subordinates whenever they met him. Since that was the case, it didn't matter whether he was a teacher or not. On the contrary, if he was forced to leave Yang Qindong because he gained a teacher, then the loss would outweigh the gain. I didn't say that I wanted you to leave. Yang Qindong tilted his head and glanced at Tiger's Mane. He chuckled and said, who said that you can't serve by my side after becoming a division commander? Alright, don't think too much about it. If I let you be a division commander, just do it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be right for a regiment commander to always be a senior colonel. Tiger's Mane didn't care about Yang Qindong's military rank. He only cared that the young master wouldn't let him leave his side. Therefore, when he heard this, he chuckled and revealed a face full of gratitude. Let's go. Don't just laugh foolishly. Accompany me to take a look around the city. Yang Qindong pushed his legs and rode forward. Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, and the others behind him also hurriedly followed and headed towards Tulu City. Tulu City was indeed terrifyingly poor. From afar, there didn't seem to be anything other than some dilapidated and dangerous houses. Speaking of which, it was just like Alakamaki before he became the first city. He was so poor that he didn't even have anything. Young master, this place is too poor. Should we transform this into a second first city? Tiger's Mane's emotions had stabilized and he began to speak from a strategic point of view. There's no hurry. Yang Qindong slowly shook his head. How about this? Tell the people that if they don't want to stay here, they can arrange for them to live in the first city. As for this place, just leave the soldiers to guard it. Tulu City's geographical location was very important. According to Yang Qindong's previous intention, he wanted to occupy this important place and then build it into a city like the first city. But along the way, his thoughts had changed. After all, this place was too close to Baiming. 200 miles ahead was Baiming's Wanquan Department and Xian Mansion. If an accident happened, this place would become an isolated city. Not only did he need to arrange a heavy defense, but he also needed to be on guard against other people's attacks. This was not a good feeling and it was not something Yang Qindong was happy about. Therefore, he hadn't made a final decision about the future of this city. He still needed to take a look. Since Yang Qindong said that he wasn't in a hurry, Tiger's Mane naturally wouldn't say anything. He just nodded and remained silent. In fact, in the entire Yangxia, once it was Yang Qindong's decision, it was equivalent to the final decision. No one would dare to challenge his authority. The days in winter were very short. After just walking around the streets, the sky had already darkened. The largest house in the city had become the temporary Yang Mansion and Yang Qindong's temporary residence. After entering the Yang Mansion, Yang Qindong ate a hot meal while listening to the news from the scout. After reporting that Lu Zhua's 2nd Regiment and the 3rd Regiment of recruits had landed at the corner tonight, he raised his head and gave instructions. Tell Commander Lu to be careful. Although the Tatar army suffered a loss last night, it doesn't mean that they won't come to cause trouble. Yes, 6th young master. The scout received a reply, saluted and turned to leave. But as soon as he left, Tiger's Mane strode into the hall and came in front of Yang Qindong, who had already stuffed the last mouthful of rice into his mouth. Young master, Commander Su He is here. He said that he has something to report to you. Ask him to wait in the hall. Yang Qindong took the towel from Beta Persei, wiped his hands, and nodded lightly. Tiger's Mane's previous report said that when facing the Tatar soldiers during the day, the 3,000 Tatar cavalry regiment didn't have the slightest intention of going easy. This made him very happy. At least it proved that this person understood the big picture. Even so, he should be properly comforted and rewarded. Soon, in the side hall, Su He, who was wearing a black cloak, was led by Tiger's Mane to Yang Qindong, who was sitting at the head of the table. He immediately saluted and said respectfully, Commander of the Tatar Cavalry Regiment, Su He, reporting to the 6th young master. Su He, your Tatar Cavalry Regiment performed well today. I have already passed down the order. Each soldier will record a military merit once. Those who killed the enemy will be rewarded accordingly. As the commander of the regiment, you have contributed the most. You will be rewarded with an additional 1,000 taels of silver, a pack of cigarettes, and 10 jars of good wine. Seeing the energetic Su He, Yang Qindong nodded in satisfaction. Thinking back, he had spent some effort and even risked entering the camp to persuade the other party to work for him. Now, it seemed that everything was worth it. Thank you, 6th young master, for the reward. Su He saluted to show his gratitude. This made Tiger's Mane smile. However, this smile quickly changed because of Su He's next words. 6th young master, Su He does not dare to ask for a reward. If possible, these rewards can be returned. Su He has other requests. I hope that the sixth young master can fulfill my request. Tiger's mane's expression changed. He actually dared to reject the sixth young master's reward. Wasn't this the same as slapping his face in front of everyone? In a fit of anger, he shouted at Su-hee, "What are you talking about? Don't forget your identity." Sigh. On the other hand, young Qindong, who was sitting at the head of the table, had a natural expression on his face. He did not show the slightest bit of unhappiness because of the other party's rejection of the reward. Instead, he asked with interest, "If you don't want the reward, then what do you want?" Su-hee's face was also red. Perhaps it was because of Tiger's mane's reprimand, or perhaps it was because of Yang Qindong's smile. His heart could not help but beat like a drum. What kind of person was Yang Qindong? Although Su-hee did not have a complete understanding of him, the great Ming's Duke of Loyalty and Courage, the God of War, and the Messenger of Longevity Heaven that the common people spoke of. Any one of these names alone had an illustrious reputation. Once such a person made a decision, how could he change his mind easily? Since he rejected the reward, the other party should be angry. However, this smile on his face made him even more puzzled. In fact, no one knew Yang Qindong's true identity. Even more so, they did not know that Yang Qindong did not attach much importance to some of the rules of the present age. Just like how he said before that there was no need to kneel when seeing him, all the soldiers who had undergone training were now used to this tradition. Perhaps in other people's eyes, rejecting a reward was a big deal. It was equivalent to rejecting the other party's good intentions. To put it more seriously, it was a slap in the face. If it was bestowed by the emperor, no matter if it was a gift or a marriage, if someone dared to reject it, it was equivalent to defying the imperial edict. That person's entire family would be beheaded. However, in Yang Qindong's eyes, he did not care about this at all. "I gave you something to show that I think highly of you and reward you. If you don't want it, then I'll just take it back. This is not a big deal." This was Yang Qindong's true thought. He did not know this, which was why Tiger Mane was angry and why Su-hee was so nervous. However, now that Yang Qindong had asked what he wanted, he had to say it even if his next words would anger the other party. Wasn't this the reason why Su-hee had taken the initiative to come here? With a plop, Su-hee did not salute but knelt on the ground. This action already showed his determination, and also seemed to indicate that what he was going to say next would not be so pleasant to hear. By the side, Hu Mang's expression changed as well. Instead of the military salute, she knelt down. What did Su-hee want? Even Beta Persei, who was standing beside Yang Qindong, stared with a pair of tiger eyes. His whole body could not help but tense up. He was only waiting for the young master's next order to teach this Su-hee a lesson. He would make him suffer and teach him a lesson. Yang Qindong's expression did not change at all when he knelt. He only narrowed his eyes for a moment. Then, he smiled gently and waited quietly. He was also very curious about what Su-hee was going to say. Chapter 778. Su-hee, who was kneeling with his head lowered, couldn't see the reactions of the others. After kneeling, he only wanted to say what he wanted to say. "Sixth young master, Su-hee requests that you properly collect Amu Galang's corpse and send it to Tingri. Please spare the 8,000 captured Tatar soldiers. Although they opposed you before, they had no choice but to do so. Many of them had received kindness from Tuachuo Buhua Great Khan. They were just repaying their kindness. That's all. However, after today's battle, those kindness disappeared with the wind. I have talked with them and many of them are willing to join the mercenary army. I hope that the sixth young master can help them." After saying everything she wanted to say, Su-hee lay on the ground again, as if she was prostrating herself on the ground. At the same time, she seemed to be saying that she had finished what she wanted to say. She could be dealt with by the sixth young master as he wished. After he finished speaking, the hall fell into silence. How was this one request? There were clearly several. Especially the matter of collecting Amu Gulang's corpse. In the eyes of the others, this was even more impossible. Since they were enemies, they had to be prepared to be beheaded. Moreover, who didn't know that the mercenary army loved to observe wherever they went? This was a great psychological deterrent. Not to mention, Suhi had already tried to persuade Amu Gulang to surrender. However, the facts proved that it was useless. Now that Amu Gulang was defeated, the mercenary army defeated him with their own strength. Why did they have to bury him properly? Tiger's Mane, who knew everything, had a puzzled expression. He looked at Su He, who was kneeling on the ground, and said, "Commander Su, don't you think you are too much? Amu Gulang is our enemy. Why do you want to bury the enemy's corpse properly? Also, how should we deal with the captives? Is this something that a commander like you can consider or even question? Don't think that you have made a great contribution by killing Amu Gulang today. Let me tell you, I don't even need the young master to make a move. I can easily deal with you. Moreover, the other soldiers of the Tatar cavalry regiment won't have any doubts. Do you believe me?" Tiger's Mane wasn't exaggerating. Although the majority of the Tatar cavalry were Tatars, and they were the Tatar cavalry under the leadership of Agadorji. However, after a few months of training, especially the political studies that took half an afternoon every week, many people's mentality had changed. At the end of the day, everyone was only willing to follow Agar Dorji because they wanted to live a better life. Later on, he surrendered with Su He and joined the mercenary group with the same mindset. Reality had proven that becoming a member of the mercenary group could solve the problem of food and clothing. Since that was the case, of course they would side with the mercenary group. Even if Su He had other thoughts and wanted to leave, there wouldn't be many soldiers who would make the same choice. In other words, the true leadership of Su He's Tatar cavalry regiment didn't lie with him as the commander, but with the higher-ups of the mercenary group, in the hands of young Master Yang Qindong. Su He was naturally very clear about this point as a famous general. He didn't doubt Tiger's Mane's words. He just lowered his head and said, "Commander Tiger, I don't want to do things based on merit. This is all my personal opinion and has nothing to do with the Tatar cavalry regiment. If you think I'm wrong, then punish me. I'll accept any punishment. Even if you want me to be an ordinary soldier, I'll accept the punishment. However, I hope that you and the 6th young master will seriously consider my request." Even though he knew this, Su He still didn't have any intention of relenting. This had already shown his determination. Because of this, Tiger's Mane didn't know what to say. He could only glare at him angrily. Then, he shifted his gaze to Yang Qindong, who was sitting at the head of the table. He believed that the 6th young master would have a way to resolve this matter. Yang Qindong had been listening attentively from the side. When he heard Su He's request and Tiger's Mane's reprimand, he didn't make a sound. Now that everyone was silent, he coughed lightly and said, "Tiger's Mane is right. Amu Gulang is our enemy. He didn't listen to persuasion and didn't take the opportunity we gave him seriously. Since he didn't take it, he's dead. Why should we collect the enemy's corpse? Commander Su, do you have any other reasons for this matter? Why don't you tell us?" Yang Qindong said this calmly, without the slightest trace of anger. However, it was precisely because of this that Su He, who was kneeling on the ground, understood that this was the 6th young master giving him a chance to explain. If he didn't take it, he might really be punished. Originally, surrendering was something that he was forced to do. He thought that he would just be wasting his time anywhere. Therefore, he decided to enter the mercenary camp and take a good look. If it didn't work out, he would just look for an opportunity to leave. However, he never thought that the moment he entered the mercenary camp, he would really be infected by the atmosphere here. Here, officers and soldiers were all equal. They were particular about punishment for mistakes and rewards for meritorious deeds. Moreover, the military discipline was strict and they would never make things difficult for ordinary citizens. Here, they could eat their fill, wear warm clothes, and have a beautiful future to look forward to. Wasn't all of this what he had been pursuing all his life? He naturally liked this place. He liked it from the bottom of his heart. Even if others wanted to chase him away, he was also sincerely unwilling. However, he still did it today because he knew that he had to do it. Now that the sixth young master gave him a chance to explain, he cherished it very much. He slowly raised his head and looked at Yang Qindong, who was sitting there with an expectant look, and said, "Sixth young master, I did it because it was not only my idea, but also the idea of the 8,000 captive Tatar soldiers. I have talked with this person and found that he is a rare talent. I wanted him to be used by the sixth young master, but he made this request, so." He didn't say what, but he believed that the sixth young master would be able to guess it. Yang Qindong's expression didn't change much. When He knelt down and said the request, he already guessed something, and He's answer was no different from his guess. "Well, tell me in detail." "Yes, sixth young master. As far as I know, Amu Gulang was an orphan when he was young. His parents were killed by the enemy. He grew up eating the food of hundreds of families. Later, he met the great Khan Tuachuo Buchuo and was raised by him. He was someone the great Khan trusted greatly. Later, he was arranged to guard Tulu city. Because of this, even though he knew that he had no chance of winning against the mercenaries, he still made the decision to fight. He wanted to use his life to repay the great Khan's kindness. Even though he knew that he would die, he still did it. Isn't this loyalty worthy of respect? Furthermore, this subordinate also learned from the other captives that when there was no food in Tulu city, Amu Gulang did not rely on his status as a general to steal the soldiers' rations. On the contrary, he ate whatever the ordinary soldiers ate. He set a very good example, which also made him hold a very high position in the hearts of the soldiers. If we can properly collect his corpse, the other Tatar soldiers will definitely be grateful. This will play a better role in the future when we incorporate them into our forces. Of course, the reason why I made this request is to let go of this person. I originally thought that he was just a deputy general by Amu Gulang's side, but after a long conversation between the two of us in the afternoon, I realized that this person had lofty ambitions. In terms of the overall situation, even I was inferior to him. After that, I learned that this person also didn't have a good background. His mother was a Han, and his Mongolian bloodline wasn't pure. Therefore, he had no room to display his strength. Such a person should be the one the sixth young master took a fancy to. I advised him to follow the sixth young master, and he raised the issue of burying Amu Gulang properly. He also said that this was his promise. If he couldn't fulfill this promise, he would rather die. Wasn't such a loyal and affectionate person the sixth young master was looking for? That's why I boldly suggested this and asked the sixth young master to approve. After finally saying all the reasons, he once again placed his head on the ground, looking like he was at his disposal. More than once, he mentioned the name of "I'm leaving." Even Yang Qindong was curious. He was very clear about Suhi's ability. He was already a rare warlord, and the person he admired must be outstanding. Beta Persei, go and bring that person called "I'm leaving." Seeing is better than hearing 100 times. Since Suhi described this person so well, Yang Qindong wanted to see if it was true or not. Beta Persei agreed and walked out. Not long after, he walked into the hall with a man with a thin face and big eyes. As soon as he entered, Beta Persei shouted in a loud voice, "This is the sixth young master, the god of war in your mouth. Kneel down. Greetings to the great Ming's Duke of Loyalty." After Beta Persei said these words, the "I'm leaving" had already obediently knelt down. On the contrary, Beta Persei, who was prepared to help the "I'm leaving," was stunned. He could only sigh in his heart, "At least you know what's good for you." He stood at the side and stared at him to prevent him from doing anything that would be detrimental to the young master. Yang Qindong did not pay attention to these small movements. Instead, his gaze fell on the extremely thin "I'm leaving." Rather than saying he was thin, it was better to describe him as thin as a match. It was only because his bones were wide that he did not give others the impression that he was very thin. Just like his big eyes, they might not have been that big originally. It was only because his face was too thin that it made his eyes look big. Chapter 779. With just one look, Yang Qindong could imagine what kind of life the 10,000 Tatar soldiers were living. According to Su He, Shibi was second only to Amu Gulang. If even he was so thin, one could imagine what kind of life the other ordinary soldiers were living. These thoughts just flashed through his mind. Yang Qindong looked at Shibi, who was kneeling on the ground, and said, "I heard from Commander Su He that your mother is Han. How can you prove it?" It was no wonder that Yang Qindong would ask such a question. He still valued Han blood. Wasn't there a saying? Those who were not of the same race would have different hearts. If it could be proven that Shibi was really a Han descendant and had the ability, he could be put in an important position. She did not expect Yang Qindong's first question to be this. She seemed to be a bit surprised that she was willing to part, but her expression quickly regained its calm. She then used a perfectly articulated voice to reply, "Duke of Loyalty and Courage, my mother once said that her ancestral home was from Suzhou. My mother's ancestors even had some wealth. However, because they later offended someone, the entire family was sent to the border. In one battle, the city was broken into. My mother also became a spoil of war. Later, she was snatched by my father and gave birth to me." After a series of explanations, Shibi smiled bitterly. "My parents are now gone. I know that there is no way to find out. However, when I was young, my mother liked to hum some Suzhou tunes when she was free. I unintentionally learned some. Now, I will sing it for Duke of Loyalty and everyone." Shibi didn't care if anyone was willing to listen. He started to sing. Although there were no instruments, even if he sang without the help of instruments, it still had a special charm. When Yang Qindong heard this, he roughly determined Shibi's identity. He had heard Suzhou's songs before. In the past, Lady Xue and Lady Xiang had often played them in front of him. Although Shibi was limited by the condition of his voice, the charm of it had been sung by him. This was very difficult. Think about it. If he didn't really hear about it or was influenced by it, why would a Tatar cavalry learn such a useless thing? Moreover, if one looked closely at Shbai's face, they would notice that he was different from the Mongols. For example, his skin color and expression were similar to many Han people. Not to mention, the Great Ming dynasty and the Mongols had been at war for many years. There were many cases where the Great Ming dynasty was involved in the war. Yang Qindong didn't have any doubts about his mother's identity as a Han, so he nodded. "Okay, you don't have to think about your background. General Su He said that you have extraordinary abilities. How can you prove it?" "Hee hee." Shibi chuckled. "Commander Su He is too kind. Actually, I'm just a captive. How could I have any ability?" "It's just that I have a different view of the current situation compared to others." The first part was just a polite remark. The second part was the most important thing. Naturally, it attracted Yang Qindong's curiosity. "What do you think of the situation?" "Yes." Shibi solemnly replied and said, "During the day, I was fortunate enough to meet Commander Su He. We talked about the mercenary army. In my opinion, the mercenary army's growth is inevitable. In fact, no one can stop it." "Why?" Yang Qindong asked in a concise manner. "There is only one reason. The Duke of Loyalty and Courage is sincerely thinking for the common people. That's enough." His face was full of confidence. If one looked closely, there was even a sense of heroism. Shbai's voice became louder and louder. "Looking at the entire grassland and even the world, there are countless people who claim to be working for the common people. However, how many of them can do it? On the grassland, the tribes are constantly fighting. Today, you fight me. Tomorrow, I fight you. The day after tomorrow, they fight you. In the end, it's all about fighting for resources and money. Who has truly thought for the common people? Who has seriously considered that what the common people really want is peace? Look at the great Ming dynasty. It seems that the land is tens of thousands of miles long, and there are many people. However, how many of the common people are able to have enough food and clothing? Are they truly satisfied? Especially in recent years, after the great Ming dynasty was divided into North and South, the people in power thought about how to unify the world and leave their names in history. In order to achieve these goals, they can only compete with the common people. They snatch gold, silver, and even rations from the common people. However, they don't know that doing so has already made them lose the hearts of the people. Even if they can unify the world one day, it will only be a temporary glory. They don't know that the common people are the foundation of a country. Only when their lives are truly good and their hearts are at peace, will the world be stable. Among them, many have long forgotten that water can carry a boat, but it can also capsize a boat. At this time, Shbai was more like an old master talking about the general trend of the world. Many of the things he said were reasonable and well-founded. Even tigers Mane and Beta Persei, who were standing on both sides of him, nodded their heads in approval from time to time. Not to mention Yang Qindong, who was sitting at the head of the table. This was the first general he had come into contact with who put the hearts of the common people first. In the past, there were also people who talked about the hearts of the people. For example, Yu Qian was such a person. He cared about the lives of the common people very much and cared about their thoughts. Therefore, this person became the castellan of Qiqian city. Facts had also proved that this person had done a very good job and had solved Yang Qindong's worries. And now, another person had appeared. It was conceivable that once Yang Qindong recognized this person's ability, he would be entrusted with an important task. That's right. At some point in time, Shibi had stopped his long-winded speech. His entire aura changed as well. He once again assumed the appearance of a sinner. He knelt there with his head lowered, looking like he was waiting to be dealt with. However, Yang Qindong's voice also sounded. He finally understood why He would rather not give him any benefits and bury Amu Gulang properly. It seemed like he also saw that Shbai was a talent. Yes, Shbai. You indeed have different knowledge from others. Since it's like this, are you willing to join the mercenary army? Yang Qindong said with a straight face. In ancient times, common people were not that important. Although there were many people who would often say it, reality had already proven that there were not many people who could really do it. This made Shbai's gaze even more shocking. Sinner is willing. But Sinner still has a request. Shbai's heart calmed down. He knew that his view should be the same as Yang Qindong's, so he took the opportunity to raise a request. Logically speaking, since he was already a sinner, he should not raise any conditions. However, it was obvious that Yang Qindong was in a good mood. Previously, He had fought a battle, so Yang Qindong was not angry. Instead, he chuckled, pass down the order, collect Amu Gulang's corpse and bury it properly. Allow 8,000 captives and the common people in the city to watch the ceremony. Considering that they have been malnourished for a long time, let them return to the logistics team of the first city and join the construction team. Let them work while recuperating. After they recover their fighting strength, we will consider joining the army. This matter will be handed over to Division Commander Tiger to handle. Yes. Tiger's Mane hurriedly lowered his head and replied. Thank you, Duke of Loyalty. I have nothing else to ask for. I am willing to join the mercenary army and will never regret it. Without waiting for him to speak, Yang Qindong had already satisfied all his conditions. He immediately kowtowed to the ground again, indicating his determination. Ha ha ha, Yang Qindong laughed loudly. It could be seen that he was really happy this time. Tulu City had been breached, so there was no distance between Yang Qindong and Baiming. Looking at the road to Xian Mansion, the situation seemed to have become even more complicated. Xian Mansion, it was not an exaggeration to say that Baiming was the northern gate of the capital. Once one entered here, one could pass through the wooden fortress and enter Huai Lai. After passing through the Jiong Pass, one would be in the capital. Naturally, Baiming had also put in a lot of effort here. He had arranged for a large number of troops, and the command center of the Wangquan Metropolitan was in Xian Mansion. The Wangquan Metropolitan was the same administrative level as the new Hegan Metropolitan. Metropolitan Commander Shi Wanshan was a second-rank military official in the imperial court. Not only that, he was also a scholar who was good at war and good at strategizing. This had to do with Shi Wanshan's background. His father was a scholar, and because he was forced to make a living, he was sponsored by a few wealthy gentry in the village to open a school. He only taught the children of the village, but he was truly capable and knew a lot. Whenever he spoke of something, others would quickly understand and accept it. It was precisely in this environment that Shi Wanshan had slowly grown up. Influenced by what he saw and heard, he began to understand many principles. He had originally wanted to follow his father's example and rely on what he had learned to obtain scholarly honors so that he could contribute to the great Ming. In truth, when he was only a teenager, he had inherited his father's mantle and become a scholar. He seemed to have a bright future ahead of him, but at this time, an incident occurred that changed the course of his life. In the second year after he became a scholar, a group of passing bandits suddenly attacked the village and killed many people. At that time, his father and family all died under the blades of the bandits. Because he was still young, he was taken away by the bandits as a laborer. In the end, he went up the mountain and became a coolie in the bandits' lair. There were dozens of young people who were taken up the mountain with him. In such an environment, they were scared to death. However, Shi Wanshan was the only one who was not afraid of power. He stood up and criticized the bandits for all kinds of wrong things, and even proposed all kinds of solutions. If one wanted to reason with the bandits, there was no difference between negotiating with the King of Hell. However, he was amazing because he could still propose some solutions to the problem. The bandits followed his suggestions and soon found that things had become much simpler. As a result, Shi Wanshan probably did not expect that he would be valued by the bandits. The defense of the mountain and how to develop in the future all fell into his hands. Chapter 780. Reality proved that gold would shine no matter where it was. Shi Wanshan suppressed the hatred in his heart and began to wholeheartedly help the bandits expand their power. At the same time, he also learned to blend in and learn some of the strengths of these people. Slowly, he learned martial arts with the bandits. Under his hard work, he gained a good ability. Then he used his knowledge to lead the bandits to clear out the nearby bandits one by one. In the end, he used more than 10 years to develop himself to a very powerful level. He himself also had a very high reputation among the bandits. It was also at this time that Shi Wanshan no longer suppressed himself. The seeds of hatred that had been planted in him for many years finally erupted. He led some of his trusted aides to kill the head of the bandit lair, which was the bad guy who had killed his family and fellow villagers. Then he took the head down the mountain and took the initiative to ask for punishment from the nearby yamen. He also told them about his background and the things he had done in order to take revenge over the years. Just like that, the local yamen, which had been a headache for the local yamen, was wiped out in one fell swoop. At that time, the yamen received a lot of money and other benefits from Shi Wanshan and reported this matter to the emperor at that time, Zhu Qizhen. The emperor was very pleased, and Shi Wanshan changed from a bandit to an official. Then he developed step by step in the army. In the end, he relied on the gold and silver he had accumulated as a bandit to pave the way. In addition to his extraordinary ability, he rose step by step. When the Tuma Castle incident came out, Shi Wanshan keenly grasped this opportunity. Not only did he vigorously support the acting emperor, Zhu Qiyu, in his actions, he also used gold and silver to pave the way. Finally, he contacted the chief eunuch, Ning, and expressed his admiration. Finally, step by step, he became the commander of the Department of 10,000 Affairs, a dignified second-grade military official. The history of Shi Huanshan's rise to power was somewhat bizarre and complicated. However, he was proficient in both civil and military affairs. He was also generous with his money. Very quickly, he gained a firm foothold. Not only did he have a high position in the military, but he also enjoyed a good reputation among the civil officials. After all, he was a scholar, and his father was also a scholar. In a way, he could be considered a descendant of a scholarly family. For revenge, he had endured for many years, which was in line with Confucianism. Such a person was more likely to be trusted by the civil officials than other military generals. It was also because Shi Huanshan was strong that in the year he was in charge of the Wan-Al division, there were rarely any Mongol cavalry around the Xian manor that he was in charge of. The only time Mu Wengilang led an army to attack him, he was easily defeated by him, which further established his reputation. Shi Huanshan was naturally overjoyed to be able to achieve such brilliant achievements at the age of 35. He always had a smile on his face and was called amiable by his subordinates. However, in the past few days, the smile on his face had obviously lessened by a lot and was replaced by a kind of worry. News of Talu's capture had already spread. This meant that he would no longer have to face the Tatar cavalry, but the mercenary army that gave him a headache. Shi Huanshan had naturally heard about the mercenary army. It was precisely because of the appearance of this army that the northern Ming dynasty's regime was saved from collapse, allowing it to display its vitality once again. Although Shi Huanshan had not taken part in the defense of the capital, he had still understood the situation from the mouths of many people. He had always thought highly of the firearms used by the mercenary army and the extremely strong military quality of the mercenary soldiers, and he was also somewhat fearful of them. The mercenary army had been tormenting the southern Ming Empire, and it was said that they had even conquered 2 small countries. Shi Huanshan had also paid attention to these matters, but because he was too far away, he did not feel much pressure. But now, the mercenary army was right in front of him. It was not something that he could avoid just because he did not want to. In the residence of the prefectural commander of Xuanfu City, Shi Huanshan summoned 2 of his deputies, commanders Ancient River, a minor rank 2 general, and prefectural commander Ning Wenfeng, a major rank 3 general. The 3 of them were seated in a side hall, drinking wine. With Shi Huanshan's methods, it didn't take long for the 2 deputies to submit to him. It could be said that they listened to his every word. Therefore, when the 3 of them met, they didn't care about etiquette. This was also the reason why they met in the side hall instead of the main hall. You already know the situation. Tell me what you think. Shi Huanshan lightly tapped the jade table with his right hand, his gaze passing between Ancient River and Ning Wenfeng. What else can we do? After all, the Duke of Loyalty was conferred by the Emperor. Since they conquered Tulu City, it's the same as helping us conquer Tulu City. Send someone to take over the city's management rights. Commander Ancient River's voice was loud and clear as he spoke very casually. No. After he finished speaking, the commander Ning Wenfeng at the side immediately waved his hand. As his name suggested, Ning Wenfeng did not seem like an ordinary general. Instead, he had the elegance of a scholar. In fact, without knowing his position, very few people would associate him with a general. In fact, his skills on horseback were quite good. He was also someone who was both civil and martial. Back then, in order to subdue him, Shi Huanshan had spent a lot of effort. At the very least, he had put in more effort than when he had subdued Ancient River. It was precisely because he had put in so much effort that this person's abilities were proven. When Ning Wenfeng said no, Shi Huanshan slightly raised his eyebrows. His eyes flashed with an appreciative smile. It was clear that he already knew what the other party meant. Gu He, on the other hand, asked casually, can't Why not? Don't tell me that the Duke of Loyalty dares to defy the imperial court's decree. No matter how powerful he is, does he dare to openly oppose our Baiming? The words, openly oppose, already proved that Ancient River had seen through the mystery. He was not a stupid person. Thinking about it, if he was a stupid person, how could he become a second-rank military official? How could Shi Wanshan have spent so much effort to subdue him? Ha! Ning Wenfeng giggled in response to Ancient River's question. Knowing the other party's temperament, he knew that the other party was not targeting him and was just stating the facts. He continued, Tulu City's location is very important, just like our Xian Manor. It can be considered one of the gateways for the Mongolian cavalry to enter our northern Ming. With them here, we only need to keep an eye on their movements to stabilize the situation. This is also the main reason why we have not attacked Tulu City for so long. Otherwise, a city defended by only 10,000 people, how hard do you think it is to chew on a bone? When he said this, Ning Wenfeng's face was filled with arrogance. It could be seen that he was also a conceited person. The reason why they did not attack Tulu City before was because they considered the importance of its location. Once they broke through, they would have to face even more attacks and harassment from the Mongol cavalry. No matter how they looked at it, it was not worth it. Rather than taking down a useless city, it would be better to place it right under their noses. It would be safer. Ning Wenfeng's words received a nod from Shi Wanshan and Ancient River. Clearly, the three of them had the same opinion on this matter. Then Ning Wenfeng continued, now that the mercenaries have taken down Tulu City, we'll just give it to them. With them in front of us, we can sit back and do what we want to do without any worries. Didn't the commander say to the court that we want to form and train a new army? Although we did not get a reply, we did not put in much effort and were only probing. I think we can increase our efforts and think about the practical problems. Ning Wenfeng's words could be said to have pointed out the current situation. What he said was very similar to Shi Wanshan's thoughts. This also caused the commander to laugh heartily. That's right, Wenfeng's words are extremely correct. With someone guarding the gate for us, we can free up our hands and do more things. How about this? I will immediately write a memorial and greet some of the important officials in the court. It should be time for the new army to train. In the Xian Manor, they discussed and came up with a plan. They adopted the strategy of responding to changes by remaining unchanged and watching the situation develop with a smile. They wanted to use the mercenaries to guard the gate of Tulu City for them while vigorously developing and strengthening themselves. But what they did not expect was that the mercenaries, who should be stabilizing Tulu City and digesting the fruits of their labor, would brave the snow and come to the Xian Manor. Of course, there weren't many mercenaries. At most, there were only a few hundred of them. But among these few hundred people, there was the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. This was not a small matter. When he heard his subordinate report that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage had personally come to the city gate, Shi Wanshan, who was reading in the study, was shocked. He quickly put on his armor, called for his personal guards, and left the manor to go up the city gate tower. As he rushed up the city gate tower, Shi Wanshan was still puzzled. He could not understand why the Duke of Loyalty and Courage, who had taken down Tulu City, did not properly digest the fruits of victory there and strengthen the city's defenses. Why did he come to the Xian Manor? What did he want to do? Shi Wanshan did not know that the so-called digestion of fruits, in the eyes of others, might be a long process, but in the eyes of Yang Qindong, who was already prepared, it was just a matter of a few words. He only needed to send the civilians who wanted to leave the city, as well as the captured Tatar soldiers, to the first city at the rear. The road from Tulu City to the first city had already been cleared by Lu Zhuo of the 2nd Cavalry Regiment and the 3 new regiments, which could ensure the transportation of people and supplies. With this as a prerequisite, the distance of 700 to 800 li was not much of a problem. As for Tulu City, 2 battalions of soldiers were left behind to maintain normal operations. It should be known that it was winter, not a good time for battle. No one would easily have any ideas about Tulu City. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.